The desert does not forget, it only hides. Beneath the endless golden waves of the empty quarter, where the sun burns the horizon into white fire, there are whispers carried by the wind. They speak of a city that once glittered under the Arabian sky, radiant with ivory pillars and perfumed smoke, a jewel of faith and arrogance, wealth and ruin. And then, one day it was gone. Not conquered, not abandoned, simply gone. Swallowed whole by the desert that had once given it life. The Bedouins still speak its name in low tones when the fire burns low and the stars stretch like scattered diamonds above the dunes. They call it Iram, or sometimes Ubar, the city of 1,000 pillars. They say it lies buried somewhere in the sands of Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter, the largest sea of sand on earth. A place where no bird flies, no traveler survives, and no sound endures longer than the breath that speaks it. It begins like a story out of scripture. The Quran speaks of the people of Ad, a mighty tribe who built Iram, the city of pillars, the like of which was never made in the land. But their pride was their undoing. They defied their prophet. They mocked the warnings of the heavens. And so, the tale goes, God unleashed a storm that raged for 7 nights and 8 days. So fierce that every trace of them vanished beneath the dunes. Some say their towers were torn apart. Others whisper that the entire city was swallowed in a single night. All that remained was silence. To the ancient poets, Iram was a parable, a warning carved in dust. To explorers, it was a challenge. But for the people who live close to the desert's edge, it is something else entirely. A memory that refuses to die. They claim to have seen strange lights on the horizon, to have heard wind humming through pillars of buried stone. Some say, on nights when the desert breathes differently, they can hear faint echoes of a city that still dreams beneath their feet. The story of Ubar begins not in history books, but in the imagination. The ancient world was filled with cities that burned bright and vanished. Babylon, Palmyra, Petra. But Ubar was different. No one could even agree if it had ever truly existed. It was the Atlantis of the Arabian sands, a mirage at the edge of belief. Yet something about it refused to fade. It clung to scripture, to folklore, to rumor, waiting for someone bold or desperate enough to try and find it. Picture the landscape where this legend was born. The Rub al-Khali is not merely a desert. It is an ocean of shifting death. Dunes higher than cathedrals roll endlessly into the horizon. Temperatures reach 130 degrees. The air itself feels ancient, untouched. Every grain of sand has witnessed something you and I never will. It is a world that resists human presence, and perhaps that is why so many believed Ubar could hide there forever. Perfect tomb. A secret that could never be unearthed. But the desert has always been both destroyer and preserver. What it buries, it also keeps. Somewhere beneath those dunes could lie walls that once gleamed white in the sun, towers rising like fingers toward heaven. Traders once led caravans heavy with frankincense and gold through its gates. Scholars from distant lands may have written its name, now lost in fragments of forgotten script. And yet, the city vanished so completely that even time seemed to lose track of it. Imagine the day it disappeared. Maybe it began as a tremor, small, unnoticed, like the sigh of the earth itself. Perhaps a sandstorm rolled across the plain, blotting out the sun for days. Winds screamed through the pillars. The ground cracked open. In a single night, the city that believed itself immortal was erased. When the storm cleared, there was nothing. Only dunes shifting where streets once stood. The people of Ad had become ghosts, their empire reduced to legend. Centuries later, when travelers crossed the same wastelands, they found traces. Old wells, half-buried stones, fragments of pottery. Enough to hint that something vast had once been there, but never enough to prove it. Scholars argued that Iram was only metaphor, a symbol of human hubris. Explorers insisted it must be real, hidden beneath layers of sand. Every generation rediscovered the mystery and passed it on, like a torch in the dark. The Arabs called it Ubar, the city that vanished. Western chroniclers, hungry for mystery, named it the lost Atlantis of the sands. And between them, truth blurred into myth. The legend became a mirror reflecting whatever each believer desired. Divine punishment, natural disaster, or buried treasure. Even now, the tale feels alive, as though the desert itself is testing us, daring us to look for what it has hidden. The wind shifts the dunes, reshaping the land like an ever-changing riddle. Maps drawn one year are useless the next. 1,000 explorers have chased its ghost, and the desert has devoured them all. Some in body, others in spirit. For to hunt a myth in a place like this is to risk becoming one yourself. And yet, the question will not die. Did Ubar truly exist? Was it once the heart of the frankincense trade that made Arabia rich beyond imagining? Or was it only ever a story? A warning whispered by the ancestors, dressed in the beauty of ruin? No satellite, no scripture, no excavation has ever fully answered. Every clue opens another question. Every grain of sand could be a tomb or a trail. But deep within that uncertainty lies something more haunting than any answer. The realization that perhaps we are drawn to lost cities not because we hope to find them, but because they remind us of everything we've already lost. The desert holds its silence. The sun sinks, the dunes turn red, and the horizon wavers like a mirage. Somewhere out there, beneath 1,000 years of sand, a story waits. One that could rewrite what we know of faith, civilization, and time itself. What really happened to the city of Ubar? Was it destroyed by wrath, consumed by greed, or undone by the indifference of nature? Or was it never there at all, just an echo of our longing for the divine, buried in sand and myth? Perhaps the answer sleeps just beneath our feet. And perhaps, when the wind shifts again, the desert will whisper it back to us. Long before the desert swallowed cities whole, long before caravans carried frankincense across burning sands, there was a name whispered in reverence and fear, Iram of the Pillars. To hear it spoken was to invoke the grandeur and folly of men who believed themselves untouchable. A city that once rose in splendor only to vanish like smoke on the wind. Its pillars, said to scrape the sky, were a testament to ambition, human skill, and pride. A pride that would eventually call down divine wrath. The story of Iram comes to us from the earliest scriptures, where words are more than words. They are vessels of memory, of warning. The Quran speaks of the people of Ad, a proud tribe that built Iram, whose like was never created in the land. They were mighty, prosperous, and confident, the rulers of an empire whose wealth surpassed imagination. Their pillars, tall and white, reflected the sun in dazzling brilliance. Their streets were paved with stone, their palaces filled with treasures beyond measure. And yet, their power was a poison, blinding them to humility, deafening them to the voice of prophecy. Legends say that the prophet Hud came to them, warning that arrogance carries a price. The people of Ad laughed. They mocked him, called him a fool, and continued in their prideful ways. Some versions of the story suggest that their arrogance reached so high that they claimed dominion over the heavens themselves. Others whisper that they exploited the land so relentlessly that it began to rebel against them. Whatever the reason, the story ends in ruin. A wind so fierce that the city and its people were wiped from the earth, leaving only echoes and pillars buried beneath the sand. To the modern mind, these are merely words, stories written centuries ago, allegories of human hubris. But to the Bedouins of the empty quarter, these stories are more than allegory. They are history. They speak of the desert not as empty, but as a place that remembers. Every dune, every hidden wadi, every sudden windstorm is a testament to what once was, and to what may be lying beneath. The elders tell stories of wells that disappear overnight, of stones that hum with ancient energy, of places where travelers feel the gaze of a city that no longer exists. For them, Iram is not a tale of morality. It is a living memory, an unresolved question, a city waiting to be found. European explorers in the 19th and early 20th centuries became fascinated with the legend. The mysterious desert, the tantalizing hints of vanished wealth, the poetry of a city that may never have existed. All of it fueled imaginations. These men and women crossed deserts in search of evidence, driven by a mix of curiosity, greed, and awe. They recorded fragments of ruins, noted strange geological formations, and mapped routes that may have once led to Iram. Yet, despite their efforts, the city remained elusive. Every clue seemed to vanish. Every hope dissolved under the endless sun and shifting sands. Some of the earliest Western chroniclers thought the story of Iram to be nothing more than myth. A city of pillars? Absurd, they would write. But even they could not ignore the strange formations they encountered. The lines etched into the desert that seemed too deliberate to be natural. Some lines formed patterns resembling roads or aqueducts. Others suggested walls or foundations. To the keen eye, these were the bones of a lost civilization, hidden beneath the relentless desert wind. To the skeptic, they were illusions, mirages playing tricks in the heat. The debate continues even today. Is Iram real, or was it only ever a story meant to instruct, to inspire, to warn? Yet, there is a human need that the legend of Iram fulfills. It is the desire to believe that there is more to history than what is written in surviving texts. That somewhere, out beyond the mapped and surveyed lands, the impossible still waits. Iram tantalizes because it exists in the liminal space between myth and memory, between what we know and what we long to find. And this longing has driven countless expeditions, each one hoping to catch a glimpse of something eternal, something untouched by time. But there is danger in such longing. The desert is merciless, indifferent to human ambition. Explorers have vanished, some never to be seen again, their names buried alongside the cities they sought. Yet, the allure of Iram never fades. It draws people like a magnet, promising the grandeur of discovery, the thrill of uncovering a secret lost for millennia, and perhaps the chance to touch a fragment of the divine. Even satellite imagery and modern technology, though far removed from the stories of prophets and Bedouins, cannot fully capture Iram. Thermal scans can hint at subsurface anomalies. LiDAR can map subtle traces of ancient roads. But the city itself remains tantalizingly out of reach. Every discovery raises more questions than it answers. Was Iram a single city or a network of settlements? Was it a trading hub, a capital, or merely a poetic metaphor codified into scripture? The sands refuse to reveal their full story. There is poetry in the search itself, in the way human imagination intersects with the desert's hidden truths. Every step into the empty quarter is a dialogue with history, a confrontation with the unknown. Explorers describe feeling a presence, a weight in the air, a sense that the land remembers those who walked it before. The desert is not silent. It speaks in echoes, in the shifting of dunes, in the faint traces of ancient rivers. It is both grave and archive, erasing and preserving simultaneously. Ultimately, the legend of Iram is a mirror. It reflects human ambition and pride, our desire for immortality, and our awe of the natural world. It asks us to confront questions that are both timeless and intimate. What happens when humans overreach? Can wealth and power endure the passage of time? And perhaps most hauntingly, can something so magnificent truly vanish without leaving a trace? Or do traces exist, hidden, waiting for eyes that are willing to see? The city of Iram may never fully emerge from the sand. Its pillars may never again pierce the sky. Its streets may remain buried beneath centuries of shifting dunes. And yet, it lives in the minds of those who search, in the stories told around desert fires, and in the whispers of wind that cross the empty quarter. It is a city that exists between reality and dream, between history and myth, a place where imagination and memory collide. And perhaps that is where its power lies. Not in stone or gold, not in walls or treasures, but in the enduring mystery itself. The question remains, if such a city ever existed, what would finding it teach us? Not just about history, but about ourselves, about the fragile empires we build and the deserts that wait to reclaim them? And if it never existed at all, perhaps the true marvel is that humans, across millennia, still seek it, still believe it, and still listen for its voice in the wind. For Iram of the Pillars is more than a city. It is a story written in the language of sand, carried by wind and memory, and preserved in the human imagination. And as long as there are those who look toward the horizon with hope, wonder, or obsession, The city is never truly lost. It waits. Long before the legend of Iram became a whispered tale, the Arabian Peninsula was alive with movement, with trade, with wealth that flowed like the lifeblood of empires yet to rise. Here, in the blistering heart of what would one day be called the Empty Quarter, the desert was not just sand. It was a conduit for dreams, ambitions, and the most precious commodity of the ancient world, frankincense. The resin of the boswellia tree, harvested from the highlands of southern Arabia, burned like sacred gold, filling temples, palaces, and the hearts of those who craved power and divine favor. It was more valuable than silver, more sought after than jewels, and it shaped the fortunes of those who controlled its trade. The caravans that carried frankincense were the veins of an invisible empire, stretching across deserts so vast that the human eye could not comprehend them. Traders moved with precision and courage, guiding camels through shifting sands and treacherous storms, navigating by stars and memory. Some routes were known only to the Bedouins, paths that twisted like veins, hiding secrets and dangers at every turn. These trade routes were not just economic arteries. They were the lifelines of civilization, the invisible scaffolding that allowed distant kingdoms to flourish and empires to dream. And at the center of this web, according to legend, lay Iram, the city that would become the crown jewel of this kingdom. It is easy to imagine the city in its prime. Vast plazas framed by towering pillars, markets alive with the scent of incense, spices, and rare silks. Merchants haggled over frankincense shipments that could fund armies or build palaces. Palaces rose with walls of carved stone and ivory, adorned with carvings of gods, kings, and celestial beings. The people of Iram were said to be masters of both trade and art, their skills so advanced that their wealth became both a marvel and a warning. Pride grew as rapidly as their towers, until it reached a point where arrogance seemed inevitable. The very geography of the desert shaped the destiny of this kingdom. Hidden oases provided water and sustenance, yet their isolation made them vulnerable. A single misstep, an unseasonable drought, a shifting dune, a sudden sandstorm, could erase a settlement almost overnight. The harshness of the land, combined with the fragility of human endeavor, created a tension that defined every aspect of life. To survive was an achievement. To thrive, a defiance of nature itself. And perhaps it was this defiance that sowed the seeds of the city's ultimate fate. The trade of frankincense was not merely a matter of commerce. It was a currency of religion, diplomacy, and influence. Pharaohs, kings, and high priests coveted it. Temples in distant lands burned its smoke as a bridge between earth and the divine. Every shipment that left the Arabian Peninsula was a message. Power, wealth, and faith could be moved across vast distances, connecting cities, continents, and civilizations. And for those who controlled the trade, there was more than wealth. There was leverage, influence, and the intoxicating thrill of being at the heart of the world's desires. Yet, for all its promise, the kingdom of frankincense was built on a knife's edge. The desert, for all its beauty, is unforgiving. Caravans could vanish without a trace, swallowed by dunes or ambushed by bandits. Oases could dry overnight. Sandstorms could erase roads, bury settlements, and even obscure entire cities. Survival demanded not only skill and courage but also an awareness that every day was borrowed, every fortune temporary, and every tower fragile. The very wealth that fueled the city also attracted envy and greed, setting the stage for both triumph and tragedy. Archaeological and historical evidence hints at the network of settlements that may have made up this kingdom. Ruins of fortified caravan stations, fragments of pottery, and remnants of stone walls are scattered across the southern Arabian Desert, whispering of a time when trade routes pulsed with life and ambition. Some scholars suggest that the legendary Iram was not a single city, but the hub of this network, a capital in the desert whose prominence became exaggerated into myth. Whatever the truth, it is clear that the people who controlled frankincense held sway over both commerce and culture, their influence reaching far beyond the harsh sands they called home. The interplay of wealth, power, and environment created a civilization that was both dazzling and precarious. The more prosperous they became, the more vulnerable they were to nature's wrath and their own hubris. Stories of Iram are filled with hints of moral lessons embedded within historical memory. A city that reached too high, a people who believed they could defy the laws of nature and God alike. The grandeur of their towers, the perfection of their markets, the precision of their trade, all of it carried within it the seeds of eventual downfall. Travelers of later centuries, wandering the desert, could still feel traces of this lost world. Some reported buried walls beneath the sands, channels that may have been roads, and even the faint smell of resin carried on the wind. Others found nothing but shifting dunes, yet the persistence of legend kept them searching. The romance of discovery intertwined with the harsh reality of survival. Each expedition into the empty quarter was a test of human endurance and imagination. Those who sought Iram were not merely archaeologists or adventurers. They were participants in a story that had begun thousands of years before, a story that the desert itself seemed determined to preserve and conceal. And so, the kingdom of frankincense becomes more than history. It is a mirror of human ambition, desire, and mortality. It reminds us that wealth and power are transient, that even the mightiest empires can vanish without a trace, and that the desert, silent and eternal, always has the final word. In the golden heat of the empty quarter, the sun strikes down on dunes that may hide the ruins of markets, towers, and temples. Every grain of sand is a witness to both the glory and the fragility of human endeavor. In imagining the city at the heart of this trade, one is forced to confront both awe and melancholy. Awe at the ingenuity, resilience, and brilliance of those who lived and thrived in such a harsh environment. Melancholy at the impermanence of all things, and the ease with which even the most vibrant civilizations can be erased by time, by sand, by nature, or by the consequences of pride. The desert does not forgive, preserves and consumes in equal measure. The legend of Iram, intertwined with the kingdom of frankincense, is a story of humanity at its most brilliant and its most vulnerable. It is a tale of commerce and spirituality, of ambition and caution, of towers that scrape the sky and streets that may no longer exist. The city, whether real or myth, stands as a reminder that some of the greatest mysteries are found not in what we see, but in what we imagine, search for, and feel in the quiet spaces of our own wonder. And the desert, vast and eternal, waits silently to reveal or conceal the truth. Even as the legend of Iram or Ubar endured in whispers and scripture, it began to vanish from the maps of men. Ancient cartographers and historians, traveling far from the deserts of Arabia, could not place it. There were mentions in texts here and there, fragments of stories, references in chronicles, but no concrete evidence, no coordinates, no ruins to mark its presence. The city, which had once been the crown of wealth and ambition, slowly disappeared not only from memory but from the very charts that shaped understanding of the world. It became a place that might have existed, a phantom city, lingering in the liminal space between history and myth. The early travelers who tried to trace the trade routes of frankincense often noted peculiar anomalies. Roads that led nowhere, wells that disappeared into sand, stones arranged in patterns that seemed deliberate but defied recognition. Each clue was tantalizing, each failure frustrating. The city that once might have been a hub of civilization seemed determined to erase its existence. Scholars in faraway lands scoffed. How could a city so magnificent simply vanish? The world has seen empires fall, cities sacked by conquerors, kingdoms absorbed into others, but to disappear as if they had never been there at all. That was almost unimaginable. In the medieval period, references to the city became almost entirely symbolic. European scholars, hearing the tales from Arab merchants and travelers, assumed Iram to be allegory. Maps of Arabia were drawn with deserts, mountains, and known towns, but no place could be confidently marked as Iram or Ubar. Some even suggested that the city was a literary invention, a moral tale coded into scripture, a warning against pride and excess. The more distant the land, the more abstract the story became, until the city seemed to exist only in imagination, like a mirage hovering just beyond the horizon. Yet the Bedouins, guardians of the desert's oral history, insisted otherwise. They knew the names of lost wells, the locations of vanished springs, and the whispers of pathways that the desert wind seemed to preserve. To them, Iram was real, not a cautionary tale, but a city whose memory had been buried beneath centuries of sandstorms and shifting dunes. The gulf between written history and oral tradition widened. Scholars dismissed these stories as superstition, while the desert itself silently upheld the truth. It was not only the maps that failed to record Ubar, but history itself seemed to forget. No Roman records, no Assyrian tablets, no inscriptions anywhere spoke of a city of pillars in the heart of Arabia. And yet, the desert bore silent witness to its existence. Caravans passed the same routes for centuries, and every so often a traveler would glimpse traces. An unusual formation of stones, remnants of walls half-buried, or the remains of a collapsed well, enough to suggest that somewhere beneath the sand lay the remnants of a lost civilization. The absence from maps created a peculiar kind of allure. What cannot be found becomes irresistible. Explorers in the 19th and early 20th centuries heard these stories with growing fascination. They read ancient texts, collected Bedouin accounts, and dared to cross deserts that had long discouraged human passage. Some journeyed for months without a single sign of life, yet the legend of a city swallowed by the sands spurred them onward. The very invisibility of Ubar turned it into a mirror for ambition. The harder it was to locate, the more valuable it seemed to be. Even as Western explorers penetrated the Arabian deserts, there were no coordinates, no surveys, no ruins to anchor the legend. Maps showed shifting dunes, rocky outcrops, and scattered oases, but no city of pillars. Cartographers who relied on the reports of travelers often relegated Iram to footnotes, marginalia, or simple question marks. One could almost imagine a mapmaker hesitating, pencil in hand, uncertain whether to mark a city that might be real or leave the space blank for fear of error. This uncertainty, recorded in stone and ink, mirrors the city's fate itself. A place that seems to exist and not exist simultaneously, caught between reality and memory. But the desert remembers. Modern archaeology has shown that many settlements that once thrived along caravan routes were abandoned as water sources shifted, trade routes changed, or sandstorms buried entire communities. The disappearance of Ubar, then, might not have been mystical but practical. A city that could not endure the forces of its environment, erased not by divine wrath but by the slow, inexorable movement of dunes, by the disappearance of vital springs, by the isolation of a place that had once been a hub. Still, the legend preserves what maps could not. A sense of awe, mystery, and longing. This tension between absence and presence creates a haunting resonance. The city that vanished from maps exists more vividly in imagination than in geography. It is a city of possibility, of wonder, of questions that have never been answered. Each generation of explorers, scholars, and storytellers has attempted to reconcile the gap between what is recorded and what might be true. The more the maps failed to show it, the more compelling the search became. And the desert, indifferent and eternal, both protects and hides its secret, ensuring that the legend of Ubar endures, even in the absence of evidence. Perhaps the most striking aspect of Ubar's disappearance from maps is what it reveals about human perception of history. We tend to measure existence by documentation, by ruins, by coordinates. If a city cannot be found in archives or on charts, we assume it never was. Yet, the desert challenges this assumption. For centuries, it has safeguarded traces of life, trade, and culture under layers of sand, challenging us to look beyond conventional markers of reality. Ubar, in this sense, becomes not just a lost city but a symbol of the limits of knowledge, of the mysteries that lie beyond our maps, our texts, and our understanding. And so, the city exists in a space between absence and presence, a phantom etched into collective memory, awaiting those willing to brave the desert and follow the whispers carried by wind. The maps may fail, the texts may omit it, the historians may deny it, but the desert remembers. Beneath its undulating waves of sand, the city waits, not as a place frozen in time, but as an enduring enigma, a mirror for human ambition, a challenge to the imagination, and a reminder that some truths are buried, not lost. For centuries, The legend of Ubar existed in the margins of maps and in the whispers of desert dwellers, a city at the edge of imagination. But in the 19th and early 20th centuries, it took on a new life in the minds of Western explorers. The age of discovery, fueled by curiosity, ambition, and the romantic desire to find the lost, created a generation of men and women who were willing to risk everything in pursuit of something that might not even exist. To them, Ubar was more than legend. It was a challenge, a treasure, and a test of endurance. These explorers came from faraway lands, from universities and societies in London, Paris, and Berlin. They were driven not only by personal ambition but by the intellectual currents of their age, the belief that every mystery could be solved, every lost city unearthed, every legend traced to fact. The deserts of Arabia, vast and forbidding, became the ultimate proving ground. Crossing them required courage, preparation, and a willingness to confront nature at its most unforgiving. Yet, it was precisely this challenge that made the pursuit irresistible. Among the earliest and most celebrated of these adventurers was Bertram Thomas, an Englishman whose expeditions into the Rub al-Khali earned him the first European account of the empty quarter. Thomas did not set out specifically to find Ubar. He was mapping uncharted territories and studying tribal customs. Yet, everywhere he traveled, he encountered stories of the lost city. The Bedouins spoke of pillars buried beneath sand, of ruins swallowed by storms, and of trade routes that led to nowhere. To Thomas, these were more than stories. They were invitations, tantalizing hints that the desert still harbored secrets centuries old. Another figure who would shape Western fascination with Ubar was Wilfred Thesiger, a British explorer who traversed the Arabian deserts on camelback in the 1930s. Thesiger's journeys were not just physical. They were cultural and spiritual. He lived among the Bedouins, learned their ways, and absorbed the legends that had passed from generation to generation. For him, the desert was alive, a place that tested the body and nourished the imagination. Stories of Ubar were not abstract. They were embedded in the dunes, the oases, and the very rhythm of life that had persisted for centuries. These explorers carried more than maps and compasses. They carried a vision of discovery. To find Ubar was to achieve something beyond ordinary human accomplishment, to uncover a city lost to time, to prove that legends had a basis in reality, and to leave a mark upon history. The pursuit blended scholarship and obsession, archaeology and adventure, intellect and instinct. Each caravan into the desert was a collision of human will against the vast, indifferent landscape, a negotiation with a world that had already witnessed the rise and fall of empires. Yet, for all their courage and preparation, the desert remained an unforgiving adversary. Sandstorms could erase entire trails in hours, leaving explorers disoriented and vulnerable. Water sources could vanish overnight, and the temperature could swing from scorching heat to freezing cold with brutal unpredictability. The terrain demanded endurance, patience, and a humility that clashed with the explorer's ambition. Many returned with nothing more than stories of mirages, strange stone formations, and the haunting feeling of walking where a lost city might have stood. Some never returned at all, claimed by the desert that had swallowed so many before them. The pursuit of Ubar was not merely physical. It was psychological. The desert tests the mind as well as the body. Explorers reported hallucinations, moments of disorientation, and a creeping sense of the uncanny. Tracks in the sand could vanish as quickly as they appeared. Distant dunes could seem alive, shifting like waves in a motion that felt almost intentional. In these moments, the line between reality and imagination blurred. The desert became a canvas upon which ambition, fear, and desire were projected, and the legend of Ubar grew ever more powerful in the minds of those who sought it. As these Western adventurers pressed further into the heart of the empty quarter, they began to collect fragments of evidence, traces of ancient caravan routes, remnants of walls, wells, and collapsed structures hidden beneath layers of sand. None of it constituted proof, and yet it was enough to keep the dream alive. Each fragment was a whisper from the past, a clue that suggested the city might have existed after all. The explorers' notes, sketches, and photographs became artifacts themselves, records of a quest that balanced precariously between scholarship and obsession. The Western fascination with Ubar was also fueled by the mystique of the East, the allure of Arabia as a land of extremes. Harsh deserts, sacred mountains, and civilizations that had flourished and vanished without a trace. In the minds of explorers, scholars, and the public back home, Ubar became a symbol of the ultimate discovery. A city that combined wealth, knowledge, and the tragic consequences of hubris. Newspapers, journals, and later documentaries would portray it as the Atlantis of the sands, a mythical prize that beckoned the brave and the daring. Yet, underlying this dream was a subtle truth. The search for Ubar was as much about the explorers themselves as it was about the city. It was a test of courage, endurance, and intellect, a way to assert human curiosity against the vast unknown. It was also a mirror reflecting their own desires, the need to leave a mark, to find proof of greatness, to touch the past and claim it as knowledge. In chasing a city that had vanished from maps, they were confronting not just the desert but the limits of human perception and imagination. The Western dream of Ubar was therefore a story of both ambition and humility. The explorers pushed boundaries, yet they were repeatedly humbled by a landscape that refused to be conquered or fully understood. They were drawn by legend, sustained by hope, and disciplined by the desert's merciless demands. In their journeys, the city existed simultaneously as a historical possibility, a mythic ideal, and a symbol of human yearning. It became clear that the pursuit of Ubar was less about reaching a physical destination than about participating in a narrative that spanned centuries, civilizations, and the boundary between fact and imagination. And so, the city that vanished from maps persisted in the minds of those willing to risk everything to find it. The Western explorer's dream was not only about discovery, it was about belief. To search for Ubar was to acknowledge the power of legend, the endurance of memory, and the unbroken voice of a desert that guards its secrets jealously. It was to enter a world where the line between history and myth blurs, and where every grain of sand could be a clue, a remnant, or a message from a civilization that refused to vanish entirely from human consciousness. In the end, the Western dream of Ubar speaks to something eternal. The human need to chase the unreachable, to believe in the possibility of the extraordinary, and to confront the unknown with courage, curiosity, and imagination. The city may remain buried beneath dunes, elusive and enigmatic, but the dream it inspires endures. An invitation to walk into the desert, to listen to its whispers, and to imagine a world where legends live, waiting to be rediscovered. The desert has always been a place of secrets, a landscape that erases as much as it preserves. For centuries, explorers relied on intuition, Bedouin guides, and the shifting stars to navigate its endless expanse. Every step was a gamble, every sighting of stone or mound a potential clue. But it was only in the late 20th century, with the advent of modern technology, that the desert itself seemed to finally speak in a language humans could decipher. The secrets of Ubar, once whispered only in legend and scripture, were now visible from space. In the 1980s, NASA scientists, seeking to understand climate change and geological shifts, began using satellite imaging to survey some of the world's most remote regions. When researchers focused on southern Arabia, they noticed something strange beneath the sands. Long, linear formations that seemed too regular, too deliberate to be natural. At first, scientists hesitated to interpret these as evidence of human activity. Could a civilization have existed here, in the heart of the empty quarter, and left such faint traces? The images suggested a hidden network of pathways, old caravan routes that had long vanished from memory and maps. For Nicholas Clapp, a filmmaker and amateur archaeologist, the discovery was electrifying. He had spent years fascinated by the legend of Ubar, piecing together historical accounts, Bedouin stories, and fragments of archaeological evidence. When he saw the satellite imagery, it was as if the desert itself had finally pointed him toward the city he had long sought. The lines beneath the sand converged in a single location, a point that suggested not merely a settlement but the hub of a lost network of trade and culture. For the first time, it seemed possible that Ubar was not entirely myth, that its story had been preserved in the subtle patterns of the land itself. The use of satellite technology transformed the search for Ubar. It allowed researchers to see beneath the shifting sands, revealing patterns invisible to the naked eye. Channels that might have been roads, foundations of structures, and the outlines of ancient settlements could now be traced. The desert, which had swallowed the city whole, had unwittingly preserved its memory in the patterns of its dunes and the subtle signs of ancient riverbeds. Every image was a puzzle piece, every anomaly a potential clue, and Clapp was determined to follow the trail to its conclusion. This new era of space archaeology changed not only the methodology but the stakes. What had once been a romantic quest of exploration became a scientific pursuit, grounded in evidence yet still shrouded in mystery. The desert yielded hints but not certainties. Satellite data suggested locations and pathways, but it could not tell the full story of the people who lived there, the culture they built, or the catastrophe that erased them. For Clapp and others, the images were both revelation and challenge. A whisper from history demanding interpretation, a riddle waiting to be solved. The patterns revealed under the sand were remarkable in their scale and sophistication. The lines extended for hundreds of kilometers, suggesting trade routes that connected distant oases and settlements. Intersections hinted at hubs where merchants would meet, exchange goods, and rest before continuing their journeys across the harsh terrain. Some areas appeared to contain clusters of foundations, walls, or other structures, though their precise nature could not yet be discerned. The satellite images offered the first tangible evidence that the legends of a lost city were not merely flights of imagination but traces of human ingenuity, hidden beneath centuries of desert activity. Yet the revelations came with complications. The more Clapp and his team examined the images, the more questions arose. Were these patterns evidence of a single, central city, Ubar, or a series of settlements connected by trade routes? Could the supposed city be merely a hub within a vast network rather than an isolated metropolis? The technology had opened a window into the past, but it had also deepened the mystery, revealing that the desert story was far more complex than a simple narrative of rise and fall. Even as technology advanced, the desert remained a formidable opponent. Field expeditions were required to verify the satellite findings, but the landscape itself resisted scrutiny. Shifting dunes could bury or reveal evidence overnight. Extreme heat and isolation tested the limits of human endurance. Every step into the empty quarter was a confrontation with both the past and the present. The explorers had to navigate not only the physical dangers of the desert, but also the psychological strain of walking where time seemed suspended, where history had been swallowed by sand, and where the line between myth and reality was almost imperceptible. Despite the challenges, the satellite imagery marked a turning point. It was the first time that the desert's hidden architecture could be studied systematically, rather than relying solely on anecdotal accounts or chance discoveries. The images provided a roadmap, albeit an incomplete one, suggesting where to dig, where to focus efforts, and where the whispers of legend might intersect with the traces of history. It transformed Ubar from an idea into a tangible target, from myth into something that could be pursued with a combination of intuition, perseverance, and scientific rigor. The emotional impact of this discovery cannot be overstated. For Clapp, every new image brought a thrill of possibility and a haunting sense of responsibility. To follow the lines beneath the sand was to enter the memory of a civilization long gone, to walk in the shadows of a city that had fascinated humanity for centuries. The desert, silent and unyielding, had finally spoken, offering a hint of its secrets to those patient enough to listen. Yet the full story remained elusive, as if the city itself were testing the curiosity and determination of those who sought it. Ultimately, the use of satellites and modern imaging technology transformed the legend of Ubar from a story of myth and oral tradition into a scientific inquiry. It allowed humans to see what the desert had hidden, to trace the faint echoes of a civilization that had vanished from maps, and to follow the subtle patterns of trade, life, and ambition beneath the sands. Yet, even with this technological marvel, the desert maintains its authority. It reveals just enough to ignite wonder and hope, but never enough to claim the truth fully. The city, or the memory of it, remains tantalizingly out of reach, preserved in the delicate interplay between technology, imagination, and the relentless, enduring desert. The desert had become both partner and adversary, whispering secrets through satellites while challenging every assumption. Every line and anomaly revealed under the scorching Arabian sun was a clue, a hint of a civilization lost, a promise of discovery tempered by the realization that some mysteries are never meant to be fully solved. In the shifting sands of the empty quarter, history waits silently, waiting for those brave or obsessed enough to interpret its patterns. And in that waiting lies both the thrill of discovery and the enduring power of legend. In the vast, shifting expanse of the empty quarter, where the horizon melts into the heat and sand moves like waves on a restless sea, one man devoted his life to chasing a ghost. Nicholas Clapp was no ordinary explorer. He was a storyteller, a dreamer, a man obsessed with the idea that the lost city of Ubar was more than legend. He believed that beneath the ever-moving dunes lay a civilization swallowed by time, a city whose memory had endured only in whispers, scripture, and the subtle imprints it left on the land. What set Clapp apart was his willingness to follow the faintest traces, to see patterns invisible to most, and to trust the desert when the world had long written it off as empty. Clapp's journey began not with maps or compasses, but with stories. Stories told around fires by Bedouins who spoke of pillars buried beneath sand, of ruined towers glimpsed on the horizon in rare, fleeting moments, and of caravan routes that vanished into the desert, leaving no trace. These tales were often dismissed by scholars as superstition, yet Clapp understood their power. In the desert, oral memory is as vital as stone. It is a ledger of survival, a living archive of history. To ignore it would be to misunderstand the very landscape he sought to navigate. Armed with satellite images provided by NASA and an unshakable belief in the possible, Clapp began piecing together a puzzle that had spanned centuries. The satellites revealed a network of lines stretching across the sands, some nearly straight, others curving with the natural undulations of the land. To most, these were simply geological anomalies. To Clapp, they were tracks, the remnants of ancient trade routes converging on a single point. Each line was a whisper from the past, an invisible path that had guided caravans laden with frankincense, gold, and faith across the desert for generations. But following these tracks was no simple task. The desert is both guardian and adversary, and it punishes haste and overconfidence. Clapp's expeditions faced scorching heat, unrelenting sun, and nights so cold that the stars seemed to pierce the body like needles. Every day, dunes shifted, erasing evidence, creating new challenges, and testing both physical endurance and mental resolve. Camels, the indispensable companions of desert travel, struggled across soft sand. Supplies ran low, and the weight of isolation pressed on every member of the expedition. In this relentless environment, Clapp's obsession was both his compass and his burden. The most extraordinary aspect of Clapp's search was his ability to merge the ancient with the modern. He combined Bedouin knowledge, oral histories passed down through generations, with the precision of satellite imagery and archaeological reasoning. Where one source fell short, the other filled the gaps. He could interpret a faint mound in the sand as the remains of a collapsed wall, or a linear depression as the trace of a forgotten roadway. The desert, ever shifting and silent, began to reveal its secrets, but only to those who knew how to look, who could listen as much as see. Months of meticulous planning, measurement, and observation brought Clapp and his team closer to the city than anyone had been in centuries. Following the satellite lines, they discovered a site that seemed to correspond with the convergence of the ancient trade routes. There were remnants of walls, crushed foundations, and fragments of pottery. Small, silent witnesses to a civilization lost to time. For Clapp, each discovery was a revelation, a tangible proof that the stories, the scripture, and the legends were not entirely fiction. Yet the evidence was fragmentary, elusive, and tantalizingly incomplete, leaving space for doubt, interpretation, and wonder. The emotional weight of these discoveries was immense. Here, in the scorching desert, Clapp could feel the pulse of history beneath his feet. He imagined the city alive. Markets bustling with merchants, camels laden with frankincense, pillars glinting in the sun, and the people of Ubar moving through streets built with ambition and pride. And yet, he also imagined the night when the city vanished. The winds that may have swallowed towers, the sand that buried streets, the silence that followed. In every grain of sand, there was both life and absence, presence and loss. Clapp's pursuit was not without controversy. Some archaeologists questioned whether the site he identified could truly be Ubar, or whether it was simply one of many settlements along the ancient trade routes. Others argued that he was chasing myth, that the desert had claimed the city long ago and no human eyes could find it again. Clapp, however, understood that the search itself was part of the story. To follow these tracks, to interpret these clues, was to engage directly with history, to breathe life into a narrative that had survived only in legend and scripture. Even more compelling was the idea that the city Clapp sought may have been more than a singular metropolis. It may have been a network, a hub for the frankincense trade, a point where the fortunes of an empire intersected with the harsh realities of the desert. The satellite imagery, when combined with his findings on the ground, suggested a civilization that was sophisticated, far-reaching, and yet fragile. Ubar, in this light, was not merely a city swallowed by sand. It was a testament to human ingenuity, ambition, and vulnerability. The search also demanded patience, humility, and respect for the desert itself. Clapp often wrote about the uncanny feeling of being observed, of the landscape holding its breath as if evaluating his intentions. The desert is a repository of memory, he believed, and only those who approached it with reverence could hope to understand even a fragment of its stories. Walking where caravans had once crossed, where a city may have thrived and then disappeared, was a confrontation with both the grandeur and impermanence of human endeavor. Ultimately, Clapp's journey was as much about understanding humanity as it was about locating Ubar. The city itself, buried beneath centuries of sand, became a mirror for the explorer's own persistence, curiosity, and desire for connection with the past. Every step, every observation, and every discovery reflected a dialogue between human will and the mysteries of nature. And perhaps, in following these tracks, Clapp was not merely searching for a lost city. He was searching for a bridge between myth and reality, a way to touch a civilization that had endured only in stories, scripture, and memory. As the sun rose over the dunes, casting long shadows across the barren landscape, one could almost feel the city's presence beneath the sand. The pillars may have crumbled, the streets may have vanished, and the markets may have turned to dust, but the memory endured. For Clapp, the man who followed the tracks, this was both reward and revelation. The desert had finally whispered some of its secrets, offering a glimpse of a world long erased, yet preserved in subtle patterns, in echoes of trade, and in the imagination of those willing to listen. The moment Nicholas Clapp and his team uncovered evidence that might correspond to Ubar, the world of archaeology was shaken, but not in uniform agreement. What some hailed as the discovery of a lost city, others dismissed as the misinterpretation of natural formations or scattered ruins from multiple settlements. The desert, it seemed, did not yield its secrets easily, and the story of Ubar became a battleground between evidence and imagination, between legend and the rigorous demands of scientific method. At the heart of the debate was the very definition of a city. The satellite imagery and on-the-ground findings suggested walls, foundations, and traces of what might have been roads converging on a central point. Clapp argued that this was the hub of the ancient frankincense trade, a thriving metropolis buried by time and sand. Skeptics countered that these were simply remnants of smaller, dispersed settlements connected by trade, nothing approaching the grandeur described in legend or scripture. The desert could preserve remnants, but it also created illusions. Wind, erosion, and shifting dunes could sculpt the land into forms that seemed human-made when in fact they were entirely natural. Further complicating matters was the temptation to conflate legend with archaeology. Stories of Iram of the Pillars and the destruction of the people of Ad are rich, vivid, and morally charged. It is easy to romanticize these accounts, to allow imagination to fill gaps in evidence. For some archaeologists, Clapp's identification of Ubar as a single, grand city was a leap too far, a blending of myth and science that could undermine credibility. Yet for others, dismissing oral traditions, Bedouin knowledge, and centuries of storytelling as irrelevant was equally problematic. The desert preserves not only physical traces but cultural memory, and to ignore it was to risk an incomplete understanding of history. The controversy gained momentum as further excavations were undertaken. Teams uncovered structures that suggested a sophisticated settlement, walls, wells, and the remains of a fortress, but the scale fell short of the mythical description of Iram. Columns, pillars, or massive towers described in scripture were nowhere to be found. Was this evidence that the city had been exaggerated over time, that the grandeur had been symbolic rather than literal? Or was it the result of destruction and centuries of wind, sand, and natural erosion that had reduced Ubar to fragments? Every piece of evidence raised new questions, and every question sparked debate. Some scholars went further, suggesting that Clapp's site was not Ubar at all, but one of many settlements along the frankincense trade routes. These settlements, while significant, were never intended to rival the splendor of legend. They were practical hubs for commerce, rest stops for caravans, and points of regional authority. The story of Iram, they argued, was likely a conflation of multiple settlements, amplified over centuries into a single mythic city. The idea that one place had been swallowed entirely by sand in a single catastrophic event, as described in scripture, was appealing but perhaps historically inaccurate. Yet the controversy also highlighted a deeper tension in archaeology: the interplay between human imagination and empirical evidence. Archaeologists are trained to rely on data, on excavation, on carbon dating and stratigraphy. But when dealing with a site like Ubar, where centuries of sand and shifting dunes obscure everything, data is incomplete. One must read subtle clues in patterns, in satellite images, in Bedouin stories. To some, this is a danger, a slippery slope from science into conjecture. To others, it is an opportunity, a chance to bridge mythology and archaeology, to explore the intersection of human memory and physical traces. The media, too, played a role in shaping perceptions. News articles, documentaries, and magazines presented Ubar as the lost city of the sands or the Atlantis of Arabia, often glossing over scholarly caution. For the general public, the narrative was compelling. A city of wealth and pride, buried beneath an unyielding desert, waiting for rediscovery. For archaeologists, this presented challenges, as public expectation often outpaced evidence. The line between discovery and legend blurred further, leaving the debate alive in both professional and popular spheres. Despite the controversies, the excavation site revealed compelling details. Remnants of walls suggested organization, communal planning, and architectural intent. Wells and evidence of water management indicated sophisticated survival strategies in one of the harshest environments on Earth. Pottery shards and tools pointed to a community engaged in trade and daily life, connected to the wider Arabian Peninsula. The city may have been smaller than legend suggested, but it had been real, inhabited, and meaningful. A hub whose echoes survived in trade routes, oral history, and scripture. Clapp's insistence on considering legend as part of the evidence was both innovative and contentious. He argued that Bedouin oral histories, while not literal, provided context, coordinates, and continuity that modern archaeology alone could not. To dismiss centuries of memory, he believed, was to risk missing a piece of the puzzle. This approach, however, was met with skepticism. Can myth be evidence? Can legend guide scientific excavation? These questions fueled intense discussion, challenging conventional methodologies and opening debates that continue to this day. The Ubar controversy also sparked philosophical reflection on the nature of discovery. Is uncovering a city merely about finding stone and foundations, or is it about interpreting the story of a civilization that has been obscured by time and nature? Can the lessons of Ubar be found only in what is visible, or also in what has been preserved in memory, legend, and the imagination of generations? The city's physical remains were fragments, but its impact stretched across centuries and cultures, challenging historians and explorers alike to rethink the boundaries of evidence. In the end, the archaeology of Ubar is as much about questions as answers. It is about the dialogue between myth and science, between memory and material, between the desert's silence and human curiosity. Every excavation, every shard of pottery, every faint trace of a wall speaks to the city's existence while simultaneously reminding us of its fragility. The debate ensures that Ubar remains alive, not only beneath the sands but in the minds of those who seek to understand it. And perhaps that is the enduring power of Ubar. It challenges us to confront uncertainty, to reconcile imagination with evidence, and to recognize that some mysteries are designed to endure. The city, whether partially real, entirely symbolic, or somewhere in between, continues to inspire awe, debate, and reflection. It exists in the sand, in the stories of the desert, and in the restless curiosity of humanity, reminding us that history is never entirely fixed, and that some secrets are meant to provoke, to challenge, and to endure. The legend of Ubar, the fabled city of pillars, does not end with its existence. It culminates in its dramatic disappearance, swallowed by sand and time. Across centuries, scholars, explorers, and storytellers have speculated about the forces that could have erased a city so magnificent from the face of the earth. Every theory, from the spiritual to the geological, is charged with the tension between awe and horror, between the human fascination with grandeur and the terror of impermanence. The disappearance of Ubar is not just a historical puzzle. It is a mirror reflecting human ambition, pride, and the relentless forces of nature. One of the earliest and most enduring theories comes from the scriptures themselves: divine retribution. According to these accounts, the people of Ad, who built Iram, were arrogant and defiant, ignoring the warnings of the prophet Hud. Their pride, their belief in their own invincibility, and their exploitation of the land were said to invite the wrath of God. A cataclysmic wind, unseen, unstoppable, and merciless, swept across the city, destroying the inhabitants and burying the city beneath the desert. This theory, while spiritual in nature, carries a powerful narrative resonance. It transforms Ubar from a mere lost city into a moral cautionary tale, a reminder that no civilization, however mighty, is immune to consequences. Yet, modern scientists and archaeologists have sought explanations grounded in the physical world. One leading hypothesis involves geological collapse. Ubar, situated near the southern edge of the Rub al-Khali, may have been built atop a network of underground salt domes or limestone caverns. Over centuries, these formations could have collapsed under the city's weight, creating sinkholes, swallowing water sources, and destabilizing the very foundations of buildings. Such an event would not only destroy structures but also disrupt trade, agriculture, and survival itself, forcing inhabitants to abandon the city. This theory aligns with satellite evidence showing depressions and anomalies beneath the desert, hinting at the slow but inexorable reshaping of the land itself. Environmental factors may have compounded the city's fragility. The desert is not static. It shifts, expands, and reclaims territories with subtle yet devastating persistence. Water sources that once sustained life may have dried or relocated, leaving wells empty and crops impossible to grow. Trade routes, the lifeblood of the frankincense economy, could have shifted due to changing climate or natural disasters. A city that depended on precise logistics, oases, and commerce would quickly become unsustainable in the face of environmental collapse. To the inhabitants, the desert would have appeared merciless, relentless, and inescapable, a silent killer burying their civilization under sand and time. Some researchers speculate that the destruction may have been gradual rather than sudden. Perhaps Ubar did not vanish in a single catastrophic event, but slowly declined as trade routes shifted, resources dwindled, and inhabitants migrated elsewhere. Over decades or centuries, the city's streets could have emptied, walls crumbled, and the desert reclaimed the ruins. The legends of divine wrath or windstorms might then represent an exaggeration of natural decline, transformed into myth by generations who witnessed the echoes of a lost city. Even in this theory, the result is the same. Ubar disappears, leaving only fragments, traces, and whispers across the sands. Another provocative line of thought involves conflict and human agency. Could Ubar have fallen not only to natural forces but to enemies, internal strife, or rebellion? The wealth of the city, derived from control of the frankincense trade, would have attracted envy, greed, and ambition. In a region where empires rose and fell in cycles of conquest and collapse, the city may have been attacked, partially destroyed, or abandoned after political upheaval. The desert would have quickly swallowed evidence of warfare, leaving behind the quiet mystery that has fascinated explorers for centuries. Natural disasters beyond windstorms and desertification also enter the conversation. Earthquakes, flash floods, or regional climate events could have compounded the challenges faced by the city. In a place where survival depended on precision and timing, even a minor shift in resources or infrastructure could trigger a cascade of collapse. The combination of human pride, environmental fragility, and geological instability forms a scenario that, while less sensational than divine wrath, is equally devastating. Yet each theory carries its own contradictions. A single catastrophic wind aligns with scripture and legend but is difficult to verify archaeologically. Gradual decline or geological collapse is plausible but fails to capture the dramatic narrative preserved in Bedouin storytelling. Warfare explains human agency but leaves fewer physical traces visible today. The interplay between myth and evidence creates a tension that is at the heart of Ubar's mystery. The city may have disappeared in a way that defies simple explanation, blending human ambition with the formidable power of nature. It is also important to consider the human perspective in all these theories. The stories of destruction are not merely about buildings or trade. They are about lives, hopes, and ambitions erased. The people of Ubar, whether caught in divine wrath, environmental catastrophe, or societal collapse, experienced fear, loss, and displacement. Every narrative of destruction carries with it the echoes of human emotion, the desperation to survive, the pride of achievement, and the tragedy of failure. The desert holds these memories as invisibly as it holds ruins, encoded in its sand, wind, and topography. In this sense, the theories of destruction are as much psychological and symbolic as they are scientific. They force us to confront the fragility of human achievement and the hubris inherent in civilizations that believe themselves eternal. They remind us that even the most magnificent creations can vanish, leaving only faint traces, stories, and speculation for future generations to reconstruct. Ubar's disappearance becomes a lesson as much as a mystery, a meditation on pride, endurance, and the limits of human control. The fascination with Ubar's destruction endures because it touches on universal fears and questions. How does a civilization vanish? How does time, nature, and human error conspire to erase greatness? And, perhaps most hauntingly, what is lost when memory itself becomes fragmented, when the truth is buried beneath centuries of shifting sand? The city of pillars, whether destroyed by wind, earth, water, or pride, serves as a reminder of the impermanence of even the most ambitious human endeavors. Ultimately, the theories of Ubar's destruction invite reflection on the intersection of history, myth, and human imagination. They do not provide definitive answers, but they illuminate the range of possibilities, blending geology, climate science, anthropology, and legend into a narrative both awe-inspiring and humbling. Ubar's disappearance is not just a historical event. It is a story that resonates with the human desire to understand, to explain, and to find meaning in the fragile arc of civilization. In the end, the city may have vanished from sight, but it continues to exist in the stories we tell, the questions we ask, and the desert that guards its secrets, waiting for those willing to follow the tracks of memory, myth, and sand. The story of Ubar exists in two worlds: the world of legend, passed down through scripture, oral tradition, and centuries of imagination, and the world of evidence, carefully gathered by explorers, archaeologists, and scientists attempting to reconstruct history from fragments buried beneath the desert sands. These two realities often collide, creating tension, debate, and fascination. To understand Ubar is to navigate this fragile intersection, to weigh the seductive allure of myth against the rigorous demands of proof, and to accept that both perspectives may be necessary to capture even a shadow of the truth. Legends have a power that evidence rarely matches. They animate landscapes, transform ordinary stones into sacred pillars, and give voice to human fears and desires. In the case of Ubar, the legend of Iram of the Pillars describes a city of unimaginable wealth, architectural grandeur, and moral hubris. The stories portray people who challenged the natural order and provoked divine wrath, resulting in a cataclysm that erased the city from existence. These accounts are vivid, emotionally charged, and enduring. They are stories told not only to record history but to teach, to inspire, and to warn. To dismiss them outright is to miss the cultural and psychological resonance that has preserved Ubar in human consciousness for millennia. Yet legend alone cannot satisfy the curiosity of the historian or the explorer. Evidence is necessary to ground speculation, to distinguish the plausible from the fantastical, and to piece together a coherent narrative. Archaeology offers fragments of reality. Collapsed walls, pottery shards, remnants of wells, and traces of roads that hint at the scale and sophistication of settlements in southern Arabia. Satellite imagery, combined with fieldwork, has revealed linear patterns across the sand that may correspond to trade routes converging on a central hub. These discoveries provide tangible proof that a civilization, connected to the frankincense trade, once thrived here, even if it fell short of the grandeur described in myth. The challenge lies in reconciling these two realms. When satellite images suggest a hub of activity and foundations hint at structures, the imagination immediately fills in gaps, linking evidence to legend. Is this the same Ubar described in Scripture, the city of pillars swallowed by wind and sand? Or is it one of many settlements along ancient trade routes, misremembered and magnified into myth over centuries? Every piece of evidence can support multiple narratives, and every legend can be interpreted in light of physical findings. The result is a delicate dance between belief and verification, between storytelling and scientific rigor. Western explorers, such as Nicholas Clapp, embraced this intersection, blending legend with evidence to create a narrative that was both compelling and credible. Clapp's approach was controversial because it challenged the conventional separation between myth and archaeology. By listening to Bedouin oral histories, studying scripture, and analyzing satellite data, he constructed a story that bridged imagination and reality. Critics argued that this approach risked projecting desired outcomes onto ambiguous evidence. Yet supporters noted that ignoring legend entirely would erase a crucial dimension of historical understanding. The desert's memory is preserved not only in stone but in narrative, and to dismiss one aspect is to diminish the other. Evidence, however, introduces constraints that legend does not. Archaeologists require stratigraphy, carbon dating, and physical artifacts to draw conclusions. Desert erosion, shifting sands, and centuries of natural decay have left Ubar's remains fragmentary at best. Foundations may suggest a city, but they cannot confirm every pillar, every tower, or every event described in Scripture. Even the most sophisticated satellite analysis can only reveal patterns. Interpretation remains essential, and human error or bias is unavoidable. The tension between what can be known and what can be imagined creates a compelling space where myth and evidence must coexist, neither fully replacing the other. The interplay between legend and evidence also affects perception. Visitors to the desert, journalists, and the general public often conflate the two, assuming that evidence confirms myth in every detail. This has shaped the modern image of Ubar as a lost city of the sands, a mythical Atlantis in Arabia. Yet for scholars, the task is more subtle. To respect the power of narrative while remaining committed to verifiable data, to trace lines in the sand while understanding that these lines are not a complete story, and to consider the symbolic and emotional weight of legend alongside the material reality of ruins. Interestingly, the collision of legend and evidence can illuminate broader truths about history and human memory. Ubar, whether fully real, partially real, or largely symbolic, demonstrates how societies record and interpret experience. Legends encode cultural values, fears, and lessons, preserving them across generations. Evidence shows the practical, physical realities of life, settlements, trade, survival in extreme environments. The two together offer a richer understanding than either could provide alone. In a sense, Ubar exists most fully in the space between myth and archaeology, in the tension where imagination and empirical observation meet. The legends themselves also reflect the desert's character. Stories of divine destruction, disappearing cities, and winds that swallow towers are evocative not only of morality but of the harsh, unforgiving landscape in which the city once stood. They encode environmental knowledge, survival strategies, and warnings about human overreach. When combined with evidence of water management, trade routes, and settlement patterns, the narrative gains layers of meaning. Ubar is not simply a city lost in sand. It is a story about adaptation, ambition, and vulnerability, preserved both physically and culturally. In reconciling legends with evidence, the search for Ubar becomes a meditation on human perception. What is real? What is remembered? What is imagined? The desert challenges assumptions at every turn. Dunes shift, erasing structures, altering geography, and forcing interpretation. Oral traditions preserve memory in fluid, adaptive forms, exaggerating or compressing events over centuries. Archaeological fragments offer tangible proof, but only partial insight. Together, they create a dialogue, a story that evolves with each generation, each discovery, and each imagination willing to wander the sands. Ultimately, the tension between legend and evidence is not a weakness but a source of wonder. It keeps Ubar alive in human consciousness, sustaining exploration, scholarship, and storytelling. The city that vanished from maps and scripture persists in imagination, evidence, and collective curiosity. It reminds us that history is not only what can be measured and recorded, but also what is remembered, imagined, and interpreted. Ubar exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously, as myth, as archaeology, and as the enduring human desire to connect with civilizations lost to time. The interplay of legend and evidence ensures that Ubar remains more than a site on a map. It is a symbol, a mystery, and a challenge. The city teaches patience, humility, and respect for the past. It reminds us that sometimes the journey, the search, the interpretation, and the dialogue between what we hope to find and what we actually uncover is as important as the discovery itself. In this way, Ubar transcends its physical remains, becoming an emblem of the human pursuit of knowledge, understanding, and meaning across the deserts of time and imagination. The desert is a language unto itself, a vast expanse that communicates not in words but in silence, wind, and shifting sands. For centuries, it has been a witness to civilizations rising and falling, to trade routes bustling with merchants and camels, to cities like Ubar that flourished briefly before succumbing to time and nature. Those who have dared to enter its heart learn quickly that the desert speaks, but not to everyone. It requires patience, humility, and the willingness to observe patterns that are invisible to the untrained eye. To hear the desert is to hear history itself, resonating through dunes, ridges, and ancient riverbeds. Explorers who sought Ubar understood this instinctively. Nicholas Clapp and others discovered that maps and compasses were not enough. The desert demanded intuition. The faint lines revealed in satellite images needed human interpretation. Wind-sculpted dunes could mask or reveal remnants in a single night. Wells, long abandoned, might indicate an ancient settlement, but only when approached with care. In this sense, the desert was both partner and adversary, offering clues while concealing the larger truth, testing those who sought it and rewarding them with glimpses of the past. The voices of Bedouins were among the most profound interpreters of the desert's language. For generations, these nomadic tribes have navigated the empty quarter using a combination of knowledge, instinct, and observation, understanding the subtleties of sand, wind, and sun in ways that modern technology cannot fully replicate. They spoke of pillars buried beneath dunes, of ruins glimpsed in the shimmer of heat on the horizon, and of tracks that appeared and disappeared with the changing seasons. To the uninitiated, these stories might seem fanciful. To those who knew how to listen, they were precise coordinates, human memory encoded in narrative form. The desert communicates not only through physical traces but also through its capacity to challenge perception. Travelers report that distances are deceptive. What seems near may be impossibly far, and what appears solid may vanish beneath a mirage. Shadows stretch and shrink with the sun, altering perception of scale and direction. In such an environment, the mind is forced into hyper-awareness, trained to detect subtle cues. The slope of a dune, the placement of stones, the depression of sand where a structure may once have stood. The desert teaches patience, endurance, and observation, rewarding those who are attuned to its rhythms. Even with modern tools, the desert's voice remains elusive. Satellite imagery reveals patterns that suggest roads, foundations, and settlements, but interpretation is never straightforward. Each line, each depression is open to question. Are these the remnants of Ubar, or the traces of smaller, dispersed communities? Are they natural formations or the imprint of human activity? The desert provides clues but never certainties, forcing explorers to balance hope with skepticism, intuition with empirical evidence. It is a dialogue across time, between the living and the vanished, between those who seek knowledge and the land that guards it. There is also a temporal dimension to the desert's communication. Shifting sands can both preserve and erase. A mound of debris may hide an ancient wall. A storm may reveal pottery fragments buried for centuries. Time moves differently in the desert. A footprint may disappear overnight, while a stone structure may remain partially visible for decades. The desert itself is a historian, recording the passage of centuries through imperceptible changes, offering a narrative that is subtle, fragmented, and open to interpretation. Emotionally, the desert speaks through its silence as much as through its signs. Walking for days across its expanse, explorers often experience a profound sense of isolation, a reminder of the scale of time and nature. The silence allows reflection, connecting human curiosity to the endurance of civilizations that came before. In the case of Ubar, the desert communicates both presence and absence. The traces of human ambition, trade, and daily life, and the overwhelming emptiness left when time, wind, and sand reclaim what was once alive. The desert's lessons are not solely historical, they are philosophical. It teaches that permanence is an illusion, that even the grandest human achievement can be ephemeral. The city of pillars, whether real, partially real, or symbolic, serves as a reminder of the fragility of human endeavor. As explorers navigate dunes, follow ancient trade routes, and study satellite images, they confront their own limitations, their mortality, and the impermanence of knowledge. The desert, in this sense, is both teacher and mirror, reflecting the scale of human ambition against the vastness of time and nature. Interpreting the desert also requires emotional resilience. Frustration, fatigue, and despair are constant companions. Tracks vanish, evidence proves ambiguous, and mirages tempt the mind with illusions of discovery. Yet those who persist, who can read subtle variations in sand and stone, who respect the desert's power, and who listen to both legend and empirical clues, are rewarded. The desert offers fleeting glimpses of truth, the faint curve of a foundation, the alignment of trade routes, or the whisper of a lost city beneath the dunes. Each discovery is both revelation and reminder of how much remains hidden. Ultimately, the desert speaks in layers, through its patterns, its history, and the stories of those who have traversed it. For Ubar, it communicates that the city's memory persists not only in ruins or satellite images but in the very fabric of the landscape. It preserves the imprint of human ambition, the consequences of hubris, and the endurance of culture in a harsh, unyielding environment. To hear the desert is to engage with time itself, to trace the footsteps of generations, and to confront the mysteries that endure beyond human lifespans. In this dialogue, the desert validates both myth and evidence. Legends provide context and narrative richness. Archaeology and technology offer tangible clues. The desert holds them together, preserving traces while demanding interpretation. It challenges explorers to reconcile imagination with reality, to respect both memory and observation. In listening to the desert, one does not merely search for a city. One engages in a conversation with history, with human ambition, and with the enduring mysteries of the natural world. The voice of the desert, then, is neither silent nor complete. It is subtle, persistent, and demanding. It requires attention, empathy, and insight. For those who seek Ubar, it provides guidance in the patterns of dunes, the remnants of structures, and the faint imprints of trade routes. It whispers of people, commerce, and the passage of time. It reminds us that even in emptiness, there is meaning, and that sometimes the most profound truths are spoken not in words but in sand, wind, and the quiet endurance of a landscape that has witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations beyond imagination. In the vast emptiness of the Arabian Desert, amidst shifting sands and relentless heat, one commodity shaped the destiny of civilizations: frankincense. Its resin, aromatic and highly prized, was the lifeblood of trade, the currency of kingdoms, and the spiritual essence of rituals across continents. Ubar, if it truly existed, was at the center of this network, a hub where caravans converged, goods were exchanged, and fortunes were made or lost. Understanding Ubar, therefore, requires understanding the vital role of frankincense, not merely as a commodity but as a force that shaped history, culture, and human ambition. Frankincense, harvested from the boswellia trees of southern Arabia, was a precious substance in the ancient world. It burned with a fragrant, almost mystical smoke, used in temples, rituals, and ceremonies across Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Mediterranean. Its value was immense, not only for religious purposes but as a luxury trade item. A single caravan could transport tons of resin, each gram representing wealth, influence, and power. For cities like Ubar, controlling the frankincense trade meant controlling routes, commerce, and strategic alliances, placing them at the nexus of ancient economic and cultural networks. The desert itself shaped this trade. Caravans traversed hundreds of kilometers through the empty quarter, navigating extreme heat, scarce water, and treacherous dunes. Merchants depended on precise knowledge of oases, seasonal patterns, and safe routes. Each journey was perilous. Survival required skill, preparation, and an intimate understanding of the desert's hidden rhythms. Ubar, strategically located at the convergence of these trade routes, would have functioned not only as a marketplace but as a center of knowledge, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. Every grain of sand surrounding the city may have been traversed by traders, camels, and the dust of commerce, leaving subtle imprints that modern explorers and satellite technology now attempt to decode. This connection between Ubar and frankincense elevates the city from myth to plausible historical significance. Scholars suggest that the wealth and prominence described in legends may reflect the economic reality of a city deeply entwined with the frankincense trade. Satellite imagery revealing converging lines across the desert hints at caravan routes, guiding explorers to potential sites of settlement and commerce. These lines, interpreted alongside Bedouin oral history, suggest that Ubar may have been more than a mythic city. It was a crucial waypoint in a vast network, linking southern Arabia to the broader ancient world. The role of frankincense also provides insight into why Ubar's disappearance had such a profound impact on the region. If a catastrophic event, whether environmental, geological, or otherwise, disrupted production or trade, the economic shockwaves would have been immense. Caravans would have rerouted, settlements would have dwindled, and once thriving hubs would have been abandoned. The desert, relentless and impartial, would have quickly reclaimed abandoned structures, erasing physical evidence while allowing the legend to persist. In this way, the commodity itself becomes a clue linking economic history to archaeology, myth, and landscape. Beyond economics, frankincense held deep cultural and spiritual significance. Its smoke was believed to carry prayers, purify spaces, and communicate with the divine. Temples, altars, and sacred rituals depended on its presence, making control over the trade not only lucrative but sacred. Cities like Ubar, positioned as intermediaries in this network, would have wielded both economic and spiritual influence. The stakes were enormous. Controlling frankincense meant shaping commerce, culture, and religious practice across vast regions. In this context, Ubar was not merely a physical settlement but a symbol of power, connectivity, and prestige. The logistics of the trade also shaped the social and political life of the city. Merchants, caravanners, and laborers traversed harsh terrain, encountering dangers from nature and humans alike. Ubar would have been a place of negotiation, governance, and strategy, where wealth was distributed and alliances forged. Archaeological evidence, from remnants of wells to fortifications, hints at the organization and planning required to sustain such a hub. Even fragments of pottery and tools reflect the daily lives of those who participated in this vast economic ecosystem, reminding us that behind the legend of pillars and cataclysm lies a human story of labor, commerce, and ambition. It is also important to consider the long-term impact of the frankincense trade on Ubar's decline. Environmental changes, shifting trade routes, or political upheaval could have disrupted the flow of resin, undermining the city's economic foundation. A hub so dependent on a single commodity was inherently vulnerable. The desert, patient and relentless, would have seized the opportunity, allowing sands to engulf structures and erase visible traces, while the legend endured, preserved in stories and scripture. In this sense, the city's rise and fall were inseparable from the natural and economic environment surrounding it. Modern exploration of Ubar must therefore integrate this economic dimension. Understanding where caravans traveled, how trade routes converged, and how resources were managed provides context for the archaeological findings. Satellite imagery, interpreted alongside oral histories and historical records, reveals a pattern: linear pathways, small settlements, and strategic hubs that correspond with the collection and distribution of frankincense. These traces are faint, yet they suggest a sophisticated network that was both human-made and vulnerable to environmental forces. Ubar, in this framework, emerges as a central node in a vast and dynamic system that shaped the destiny of people, cities, and regions across centuries. The frankincense connection also reinforces the emotional stakes of the story. Every grain of resin transported across hundreds of kilometers represents human effort, ingenuity, and risk. Each journey was fraught with danger, yet driven by ambition, faith, and necessity. In imagining the bustling markets of Ubar, one can almost feel the urgency, the tension, and the triumph of survival in a harsh, unforgiving landscape. The city becomes not just a site of legend but a lived reality, where commerce, culture, and human aspiration intersected under the blazing sun of the empty quarter. Ultimately, the connection between Ubar and frankincense illuminates the enduring mystery of the city. It explains why so much effort was invested in its pursuit, why legends endure, and why modern technology has been brought to bear on the desert's secrets. Ubar was more than sand and stone. It was a hub of human endeavor, shaped by commerce, spirituality, and geography. Understanding frankincense is to understand why the city existed, how it thrived, and why its disappearance resonates across time, inspiring exploration, scholarship, and imagination. The desert, as always, guards these secrets, whispering them only to those patient enough to listen and observant enough to interpret. For millennia, the Bedouins have been the silent custodians of the desert, moving with its rhythms, understanding its subtle signs, and preserving knowledge that outsiders can scarcely imagine. Their survival has depended on reading the land, recognizing patterns invisible to most, and interpreting stories passed down across generations. In the quest for Ubar, the Bedouins were not merely guides. They were keepers of memory, interpreters of legend, and living bridges between the past and the present. Without their knowledge, the city's traces may have remained forever concealed beneath the sands. The Bedouin connection to Ubar is profound. Long before satellites or archaeologists arrived, the desert had been mapped in stories, songs, and oral histories. Pillars buried beneath dunes, lost oases, and vanished caravan routes were all remembered in subtle ways. The Bedouins' tales describe cities swallowed by sand, winds that rise without warning, and the consequences of hubris and greed. These stories were not fanciful entertainment. They were encoded survival strategies, spiritual lessons, and historical records. For centuries, they preserved a collective memory that hinted at the existence of Ubar long after its physical remains had been concealed. When explorers like Nicholas Clapp entered the empty quarter, the guidance of the Bedouins became indispensable. Maps and technology could reveal patterns, but only the Bedouins could interpret subtle cues in the landscape. The shape of a dune, the direction of an old caravan track, or the location of a well that once supplied a settlement. Their intuition, developed over generations, allowed them to sense what outsiders might overlook. They could read the desert like a text, understanding its grammar, punctuation, and hidden meanings. In many ways, they were the living archive of Ubar's story, carrying knowledge that had survived both nature's erasure and human neglect. The Bedouins' role was not limited to navigation. They also offered context and interpretation, connecting physical evidence to legend. When fragments of walls or pottery were uncovered, they could often identify their significance, relating them to stories passed down from their ancestors. Every mound of sand, every depression in the earth, became meaningful when filtered through centuries of collective memory. For the explorers, the Bedouins provided both practical guidance and a deeper sense of the city's human dimension. The lives, struggles, and ambitions of the people who had once inhabited Ubar. There was also a spiritual dimension to the Bedouin custodianship. Many Bedouins view the desert not merely as a physical space, but as a sacred landscape imbued with history, memory, and lessons for the living. The story of Ubar, the pillars, and the vanished city are often interpreted in moral terms. A warning about pride, greed, and the consequences of defying natural or divine order. In sharing this knowledge with outsiders, the Bedouins were not merely recounting history. They were offering insight into the values, ethics, and worldview of their people, transmitting wisdom that extends far beyond archaeology. The Bedouins' preservation of Ubar's memory also highlights the limitations of conventional historical methods. Written records from the Arabian Peninsula in antiquity are sparse, fragmented, or lost entirely. Physical evidence, even with modern technology, is incomplete. The oral histories of the Bedouins, by contrast, provide continuity, detail, and context that are otherwise unattainable. They connect legends, scripture, and landscape, allowing modern explorers to triangulate sites, interpret findings, and understand the human dimension of history. In this sense, the Bedouins are both witnesses and participants in the story of Ubar, linking past and present through memory, narrative, and lived experience. Trust and respect were essential in these collaborations. The desert is a harsh teacher, and the Bedouins were careful about whom they guided and what they revealed. Knowledge was guarded, passed selectively, and shared with those who demonstrated patience, humility, and understanding. Nicholas Clapp and other explorers had to earn this trust, navigating not only physical challenges but cultural protocols and the Bedouins' assessment of character. This process added depth to the quest for Ubar, emphasizing that discovery is as much about relationships, respect, and interpretation as it is about tools, technology, or theory. The emotional resonance of working with the Bedouins cannot be overstated. For explorers walking in the footsteps of a vanished civilization, the guidance of those who intimately knew the desert offered reassurance, clarity, and insight. Every shared story, every pointed gesture toward a dune or depression, brought the city into sharper focus. The Bedouins transformed abstract patterns in satellite images into human history, connecting stones and sand to the lives of the people who had once built walls, walked streets, and carried frankincense through the desert. Theirs was a living memory, both practical and poetic, bridging centuries of silence with human understanding. The Bedouins also preserved a sense of mystery. Even as they guided explorers to ruins, they rarely divulged everything, leaving space for wonder, imagination, and continued discovery. This selective sharing reinforced the desert's enigmatic character. Ubar was not a prize to be claimed, but a story to be engaged with, interpreted, and respected. The interplay between Bedouin knowledge, legend, and evidence created a narrative that was richer than any single source could provide, emphasizing both the tangible and intangible dimensions of history. Ultimately, the Bedouins' role in the search for Ubar demonstrates the importance of human memory, intuition, and cultural continuity. Technology, satellite imagery, and archaeology provide tools, but without the Bedouins, the desert's subtle cues might have remained indecipherable. Their stories, observations, and guidance illuminate the city's human dimension, linking legend, evidence, and imagination. Ubar exists not only in ruins but in the desert's memory, preserved through those who have lived with it, observed it, and respected its rhythms for generations. To listen to the desert, to follow its clues, is also to listen to the Bedouins. Their knowledge transforms sand into history, legend into guidance, and myth into possibility. They remind explorers that history is not only recorded in stone or script but carried in human memory, in narrative, and in the delicate transmission of experience across generations. In this way, Ubar's story is kept alive, not just through archaeology or legend but through the voices, wisdom, and intuition of those who have lived alongside the desert for centuries, guardians of memory in a land that guards its secrets with relentless patience. The moment of breakthrough in the search for Ubar did not arrive with fanfare or ceremony. It emerged quietly, almost imperceptibly, in the midst of relentless dunes, under a blazing sun, and amid the tireless labor of excavation. Decades of speculation, satellite analysis, and Bedouin guidance had laid the groundwork, but the desert, patient and enigmatic, held its secrets close. Only through careful observation, collaboration, and unwavering persistence did the signs of a once great city begin to emerge from beneath the sand. Nicholas Clapp and his team approached the site with a mix of anticipation and caution. Each day brought incremental discoveries. A fragment of pottery here, a collapsed wall there, traces of a foundation barely visible beneath centuries of shifting dunes. To the untrained eye, these might have seemed insignificant, but for those who understood the desert's language, each clue carried weight. It was a puzzle of remarkable complexity, demanding patience, insight, and an ability to connect disparate elements across time and space. The breakthrough came when satellite imagery, interpreted alongside Bedouin knowledge, pointed to a specific depression in the desert floor. The lines of ancient caravan routes converged here, forming a subtle pattern that hinted at human activity. Excavation began cautiously. The first shovel revealed nothing more than sand and rock, but as layers were carefully removed, the team uncovered traces of walls, foundations, and structures that suggested a settlement of considerable organization. The desert had finally begun to reveal the imprint of the city. Emotion ran high among the team. After years of skepticism, debate, and uncertainty, there was tangible evidence that the search for Ubar was not entirely in vain. Every fragment of pottery, every stone foundation, and every depression in the sand represented centuries of human activity, lives lived, ambitions pursued, and trade conducted. The city that had once vanished into legend was beginning to reemerge, not as a perfect reconstruction, but as a complex, layered reality that combined myth, history, and archaeology. One of the most remarkable aspects of the excavation was the clarity it brought to the city's economic and social life. Remnants of wells suggested careful water management, necessary for survival in an unforgiving environment. Foundations indicated planned structures, perhaps administrative or communal, hinting at a society capable of organization, cooperation, and foresight. Pottery shards and tools suggested trade and daily life, revealing that Ubar was not simply a mythical hub but a tangible city, connected to the broader Arabian economy through the lucrative frankincense trade. The breakthrough also challenged prior skepticism. Critics who argued that Ubar was purely myth were forced to reconsider. The evidence, while fragmentary, demonstrated that the city had existed in some form, occupied by people who navigated the harsh desert, managed resources, and engaged in long-distance trade. The physical traces aligned with oral histories and satellite data, providing a multidimensional perspective that combined legend, memory, and empirical observation. Ubar was not a singular monumental city of endless pillars, as legend suggested, but it was undeniably real, a thriving hub whose story had been partially obscured by time and sand. Yet the excavation was not only about physical artifacts. It was an emotional journey for those involved. Working in extreme heat, enduring isolation, and confronting the vastness of the desert tested both body and spirit. Every discovery brought elation, but also reflection. The city's inhabitants had faced similar challenges, navigating harsh landscapes, trading valuable commodities, and striving for survival. In uncovering the ruins, the team was connecting across centuries, witnessing human resilience and ambition preserved beneath layers of sand and history. The desert itself seemed to participate in the revelation. Shifting sands occasionally revealed new fragments overnight, while windstorms reminded the team of the environment's dominance. The excavation required both respect and strategy, careful removal of debris, and constant adaptation to the landscape. Each layer revealed more than material evidence. It revealed the rhythm of life, the environmental pressures, and the spatial organization that had allowed a civilization to flourish in one of the harshest climates on Earth. One of the most intriguing aspects of the breakthrough was the alignment of findings with trade routes. Excavations revealed depressions and pathways consistent with satellite-detected caravan trails, reinforcing the idea that Ubar functioned as a central hub in the frankincense trade. This connection illuminated the city's economic and strategic importance, showing how commerce shaped architecture, urban planning, and daily life. The discovery painted a picture of a society attuned to both natural constraints and human opportunity, where trade, governance, and survival were inextricably linked. The breakthrough also had broader implications for archaeology in the region. It demonstrated the value of integrating modern technology with traditional knowledge, illustrating how satellite imagery, ground surveys, and oral histories could complement one another. The search for Ubar became a case study in the convergence of disciplines, a model for how myth, evidence, and intuition can collectively reveal hidden histories. It underscored that history is not solely written in stone or ink, but also in patterns, memory, and narrative preserved across generations. Ultimately, the excavation breakthrough transformed Ubar from a distant legend into a tangible, multidimensional reality. It did not produce a city of endless pillars rising from the sands, nor did it resolve every debate about location, scale, or destruction. But it revealed something perhaps more profound: the resilience of human memory, the endurance of culture, and the ability of persistence, observation, and imagination to bring the past into dialogue with the present. Ubar, once lost to myth, was now a story written in sand, stone, and memory, waiting for future generations to interpret, explore, and understand. In that moment, standing amid foundations half buried by centuries, one could almost feel the pulse of the city beneath the feet, the whisper of commerce and ambition, and the silent endurance of a civilization both fragile and enduring. The desert, long silent, had finally spoken, revealing fragments of its story to those willing to listen. And in those fragments, the city of Ubar became more than legend or ruin. It became a bridge across time, a testament to human ingenuity, and a reminder that even in the most inhospitable places, history waits patiently for discovery. The story of Ubar, once confined to whispers of desert legends and scattered ancient texts, captured imaginations far beyond the sands of Arabia. From the moment satellite imagery hinted at its possible location, and archaeologists began to uncover physical traces, the world's fascination was ignited. Newspapers, documentaries, and scholarly articles began portraying the city as the Atlantis of the desert, a place of wonder, loss, and mystery that bridged myth and reality. The allure of Ubar transcended history. It became a global narrative, compelling because it promised a glimpse into both human ambition and the unknown. Part of the fascination lies in the city's dual identity. On one hand, it is a tangible archaeological site, with foundations, wells, and pottery fragments that provide glimpses into the lives of its inhabitants. On the other, it is an enduring legend, a moral tale of pride and hubris recorded in scripture, Bedouin oral history, and centuries of imagination. This combination of reality and myth resonates across cultures. It appeals to the human desire for discovery, for uncovering lost knowledge, and for connecting with civilizations that existed at the edge of memory. The world is drawn not just to what Ubar was, but to what it represents: the intersection of history, imagination, and mystery. Global fascination was amplified by the dramatic imagery of the desert itself. Satellite photographs revealing faint linear trails across vast expanses of sand suggested hidden networks, caravan routes, and a once bustling city buried by time. These visuals were striking, evoking both awe and curiosity. The desert's vastness became a metaphor for the unknowable, and the faint traces of Ubar symbolized humanity's enduring quest to pierce the veil of history. Media coverage, often sensationalized, portrayed the city as both magnificent and doomed, reinforcing the narrative tension between ambition and impermanence, myth and reality. Scholars and explorers alike were captivated by the challenge Ubar presented. Its fragments forced researchers to reconcile diverse sources of information, satellite imagery, field surveys, oral histories, and ancient texts, into coherent interpretations. The city became a test of interdisciplinary collaboration, drawing interest from archaeologists, geologists, historians, and anthropologists. Each new discovery, no matter how small, reverberated through the academic community, inviting reevaluation of what was known about the Arabian Peninsula, trade networks, and the interplay between myth and evidence. Ubar's story was no longer a localized curiosity. It was a global intellectual challenge. The fascination is also deeply human and emotional. Ubar evokes universal themes: the fragility of civilizations, the consequences of ambition, and the persistence of memory. People are drawn to stories where grandeur meets disappearance, where the city rises and falls not solely because of human error but because of nature's relentless forces. Ubar represents both triumph and tragedy, a hub of commerce, culture, and daily life, ultimately claimed by sand and obscurity. This duality resonates across time and geography, allowing audiences to project their own fears, aspirations, and imaginings onto the city's narrative. Tourists, writers, and filmmakers were soon captivated by the possibility of a real lost city, and the story of Ubar became part of popular culture. Documentaries and books emphasized its mystery, framing the city as a bridge between the ancient and modern worlds. Its desert setting, the Bedouin stories, and the dramatic depictions of vanished pillars created a cinematic quality that captured imaginations. For the global audience, Ubar was no longer just an archaeological question. It became a story of adventure, human perseverance, and the seductive allure of uncovering secrets that time and nature had tried to conceal. The city's global resonance also lies in its symbolic power. Ubar embodies the universal human tension between ambition and humility. The legends warn of hubris and divine retribution, while the archaeological evidence shows that its inhabitants were resourceful, organized, and ambitious. This interplay between human achievement and vulnerability strikes a chord worldwide. Every fragment of wall, every trace of a trade route, becomes a reminder that civilization is both resilient and fragile. The narrative is not confined to a single culture. It speaks to a shared understanding of what it means to build, endure, and ultimately confront the forces that lie beyond human control. Modern technology has amplified the fascination even further. Satellite imagery, GPS mapping, and ground-penetrating surveys allow people across the globe to visualize the desert and the possible remnants of Ubar. Virtual reconstructions and simulations enable audiences to imagine the city in its former glory, bringing distant history into accessible, immersive experiences. The combination of cutting-edge technology with ancient legend creates a compelling narrative tension. A city once thought entirely lost is now partially revealed, yet remains elusive, sparking curiosity, speculation, and wonder. The fascination with Ubar is also reflective of a broader human desire to connect with the past. Ancient cities, lost empires, and forgotten civilizations represent both mystery and continuity. In the case of Ubar, this desire is intensified by the desert's vastness, the fragility of its traces, and the integration of myth and history. The city becomes more than a site of excavation. It is a symbol of discovery, imagination, and the enduring power of stories to bridge time, geography, and culture. Even as scholars debate the accuracy of its location, the scale of its structures, and the nature of its destruction, the global audience remains captivated. Ubar is emblematic of humanity's quest to understand not only what was, but why it mattered, and how its lessons persist in the present. It reminds us that history is not static, that memory can endure in multiple forms, and that mystery is often as compelling as certainty. Ultimately, the global fascination with Ubar is a reflection of the city's multidimensional nature. It is simultaneously an archaeological puzzle, a legendary tale, and a symbol of human aspiration. Its story traverses disciplines, cultures, and continents, inviting engagement on multiple levels. For those who study it, visit it, or imagine it, Ubar is more than sand and stone. It is a mirror of human curiosity, a testament to imagination, and a timeless reminder that some secrets are preserved as much in stories as in the earth itself. In the vast emptiness of the Arabian Desert, the human eye alone is often insufficient to detect the traces of a lost civilization. The sands shift daily, erasing footprints, burying structures, and hiding evidence beneath dunes that rise and fall with the wind. For centuries, explorers relied on intuition, Bedouin guidance, and painstaking footwork, yet many clues remained inaccessible or invisible. The advent of satellite imagery, however, transformed the search for Ubar, giving humanity a bird's-eye perspective on a landscape that had long guarded its secrets. Satellite technology offered the ability to detect subtle anomalies in the desert terrain, revealing patterns that suggested ancient roads, caravan trails, and potential settlement sites. Linear depressions, faint alignments, and subtle changes in topography could now be mapped with unprecedented precision. What had once been invisible from the ground became legible from the sky, turning the desert into a complex canvas, rich with information waiting to be interpreted. The sands themselves, patient and unyielding, now seemed to whisper in patterns that could be read with the right tools. The integration of satellite imagery with archaeological investigation marked a pivotal moment in Ubar research. Scientists began to trace converging lines across the empty quarter, hypothesizing that these were remnants of caravan routes leading to the fabled city. Some of these lines extended hundreds of kilometers, connecting oases, trade hubs, and strategic rest points. When cross-referenced with Bedouin oral histories, these patterns provided compelling evidence that Ubar was more than myth. It was a hub in a network that had shaped commerce, culture, and daily life across Arabia. The technological approach also introduced new dimensions of analysis. Multispectral imaging, capable of detecting variations in soil composition, moisture retention, and vegetation, revealed hidden traces of human activity. Certain soil anomalies suggested former building foundations, while clusters of vegetation hinted at areas where water was once more abundant. These findings allowed researchers to focus their excavations more strategically, prioritizing areas most likely to yield evidence of settlement. In essence, satellites became the eyes of a modern explorer, extending human perception across time and distance. Yet satellite imagery alone could not confirm the city's existence. Interpreting patterns required careful synthesis with ground surveys, archaeological digs, and historical records. The images provided possibilities, not certainty. Every line in the sand, every depression could be natural or human-made. Context, experience, and intuition remained essential. The collaboration between technology and human insight became a defining feature of the search for Ubar, demonstrating that even in the era of advanced imaging, exploration remains an interpretive and human endeavor. The emotional impact of these satellite eyes was profound for researchers and the public alike. For the first time, it was possible to visualize the scale and complexity of the desert landscape that once supported life, commerce, and civilization. The patterns suggested human presence where none had been apparent, evoking awe and excitement. For those seeking Ubar, the images were both tantalizing and humbling. The city might yet reveal itself, but only if interpreted with patience, care, and respect for the desert's enduring authority. Satellites also reshaped the narrative of exploration. Prior expeditions, painstakingly traversing the dunes on foot or camel, could now be guided with far greater efficiency. The technology reduced guesswork and minimized unnecessary exposure to the harsh desert environment, increasing the likelihood of meaningful discovery. Yet the desert retained its enigmatic quality. The images hinted at human activity, but did not replace the necessity of observation, excavation, and interpretation. The desert, as ever, demanded humility from those who sought to understand it. The use of satellite technology also illuminated the economic and logistical networks that had supported Ubar. The linear trails suggested a city strategically positioned to control the flow of trade, particularly in frankincense. Patterns in the terrain indicated resting points for caravans, access to water, and the movement of goods across hundreds of kilometers. These insights not only strengthened the case for Ubar's existence, but also provided context for how it functioned within a broader regional economy, reinforcing the notion that myth and material evidence could converge to illuminate history. Beyond practical application, satellite imagery contributed to a philosophical understanding of human memory and impermanence. From high above, the desert appears as an endless, uniform expanse. Yet careful observation reveals that it is filled with subtle signs of life, labor, and civilization. Ubar, partially hidden beneath shifting sands, becomes a metaphor for the fragility of human endeavor. Even in a harsh and indifferent environment, traces endure, waiting to be read by those who can perceive them. The city's legacy is inscribed not only in ruins, but in patterns detectable only through advanced technology, underscoring the tenuous but persistent imprint of humanity on the natural world. Satellites also democratized the story of Ubar, allowing people around the globe to engage with the search in unprecedented ways. Images could be shared, analyzed, and interpreted by researchers far from the desert itself. Virtual reconstructions, based on these images, allowed audiences to imagine the city, the trade routes, and the caravans that once traversed the sands. In this sense, satellite technology did more than facilitate discovery. It transformed the way humanity interacts with history, creating a bridge between the distant past and a connected, global present. Yet, even with satellite imagery, the desert retains its authority. Not every pattern is meaningful. Some are illusions of light, shadow, or wind-sculpted sand. The technology magnifies possibilities but does not remove uncertainty. Each image demands interpretation, context, and corroboration. In this way, the desert maintains its mystery. It offers clues without revealing everything, rewarding patience, insight, and respect. The satellites serve as a tool, extending human vision, but they cannot replace the human curiosity and persistence that have driven the search for Ubar across centuries. Ultimately, satellite eyes on the sands transformed the search for Ubar, offering unprecedented access to a hidden world and revealing patterns invisible from the ground. Yet the technology did not replace the desert's voice, the Bedouin's memory, or the imagination of those drawn to the city. Instead, it became a partner in exploration, illuminating the interplay between myth, evidence, and human ambition. From the sky, the desert communicates both presence and absence, guiding those who listen carefully, and reminding us that some mysteries are as vast, shifting, and enduring as the sands themselves. Even after the breakthrough excavations and the revelations offered by satellite imagery, Ubar remained at the center of intense scholarly debate. The desert had surrendered fragments, traces of foundations, and faint lines hinting at trade routes. Yet interpretations of these findings diverged dramatically. Was Ubar the magnificent city of legend, the Atlantis of the sands, or a series of smaller, less monumental settlements, later magnified into myth by oral traditions and scripture? The archaeological community found itself wrestling not only with evidence but with the weight of imagination, expectation, and cultural narrative. Some scholars argued that Ubar, as described in Bedouin lore and historical texts, never existed as a single city. They suggested that the traces revealed by satellite imagery could represent multiple sites of minor settlements or caravan waypoints, connected through trade but lacking the grandeur attributed to them in legend. Foundations, depressions, and pottery shards, while indicative of human activity, might not signify a singular urban hub. To these critics, the romantic notion of Ubar as a city swallowed by sand was appealing but unprovable, an artifact of storytelling rather than history. Others contended that the physical evidence aligned with historical plausibility. The convergence of caravan routes, the location of water sources, and the patterns of settlement suggested a significant hub for trade and administration. especially given the prominence of frankincense in the region. Foundations and structural remains indicated organization and permanence, which could be interpreted as the remnants of a city, even if the legendary scale was exaggerated. Proponents argued that legend often amplifies reality, but that embellishment does not negate existence. Ubar, in this view, was real, though perhaps transformed over time in the human imagination. The debate extended beyond physical evidence. Linguists, historians, and anthropologists examined ancient texts, inscriptions, and oral histories, seeking corroboration. References to Iram of the Pillars, mentioned in the Quran, and descriptions in pre-Islamic poetry offered tantalizing hints, yet were often vague or symbolic. Some scholars emphasized caution, noting that sacred texts and oral tradition are not always literal records, but reflections of moral, spiritual, or cultural concerns. The intersection of archaeology and legend thus became a complex intellectual terrain, where evidence had to be interpreted with both rigor and imagination. Adding fuel to the debate were methodological differences. Satellite imagery, while revealing patterns invisible to the naked eye, required interpretation that could be subjective. Linear depressions could be mistaken for roads, natural erosion could mimic foundations, and ancient human modifications might be subtle. Field surveys and excavations added clarity but remained fragmentary. The desert is vast, and preservation is uneven. Scholars differed on which forms of evidence should take precedence, highlighting the challenges of reconstructing a civilization partially erased by time and nature. The emotional dimension of the debate was equally significant. For those who had dedicated years of exploration, the question of Ubar's reality was not merely academic. It was personal. Explorers who had followed Bedouin guidance, traced caravan routes, and labored in the desert felt a connection to the city, an emotional resonance that transcended the evidence. For them, acknowledging Ubar's existence validated decades of effort, imagination, and patience. Conversely, those skeptical of legend feared that premature conclusions could undermine archaeological credibility, prioritizing narrative over verifiable data. The tension between hope and rigor added depth and intensity to scholarly discourse. Cultural and geopolitical considerations also influenced the debate. Ubar is located in a region where heritage is deeply intertwined with identity. Discovering a lost city carries national and international significance, influencing how history is interpreted and presented. Local communities, governments, and scholars were invested in preserving the integrity of the findings, ensuring that sensational claims did not overshadow careful scholarship. The archaeological debate was therefore not purely academic. It intersected with questions of identity, pride, and the stewardship of cultural memory. One of the most contentious points was the scale and nature of the city's destruction. Legends speak of cataclysmic collapse, winds, divine wrath, or geological disaster swallowing the city whole. Archaeology, while providing evidence of abandonment and environmental challenges, could not fully confirm these dramatic accounts. Some researchers argued that gradual environmental changes, shifts in trade routes, or economic decline were more plausible explanations. The divergence between dramatic legend and measured interpretation underscored the delicate balance between myth and evidence in reconstructing history. Yet the debate itself is illuminating. It highlights the very nature of archaeology, the process of piecing together incomplete evidence, making educated interpretations, and balancing imagination with rigor. Ubar serves as a case study in the interaction between legend, memory, and material culture. Scholars confront not only the desert and its secrets but the human need to believe, to imagine, and to narrate. The city's story is thus not only about its inhabitants but about how modern humans engage with the past, reconstruct meaning, and negotiate uncertainty. The controversy also reflects a broader tension in historical research, the interplay between narrative and empiricism. Legends inspire exploration and provide context, but they can also bias interpretation. Physical evidence grounds claims, but fragments alone cannot convey culture, emotion, or meaning. Ubar exists at the intersection of these forces, challenging scholars to navigate ambiguity, reconcile competing interpretations, and consider the city both as a historical reality and as a symbol. In this way, the archaeological debate is not a weakness but a reflection of history's complexity, requiring both skepticism and imagination. Ultimately, the ongoing debate keeps Ubar alive in the public and academic imagination. Whether viewed as myth, reality, or a combination of both, the city provokes questions about human ambition, impermanence, and the fragility of civilizations. Each excavation, satellite image, or reinterpretation adds a new layer to the story, transforming the city from a static ruin into a dynamic conversation across time. The desert, silent and patient, continues to reveal and conceal, inviting inquiry while reminding us that some truths are both attainable and elusive. In this tension, Ubar transcends the conventional boundaries of archaeology. It is at once a site of material discovery, a legend preserved in oral and written traditions, and a symbol of the enduring human quest to understand the past. The debate enriches the narrative rather than diminishing it, offering multiple perspectives that illuminate the desert, its people, and the civilizations that once navigated its challenges. Ubar, it seems, will always occupy a space between certainty and mystery, challenging researchers to reconcile evidence with imagination, fact with story, and history with legend. Even after decades of exploration, excavation, and analysis, the sands of the empty quarter continue to guard secrets that defy easy explanation. The desert, vast and merciless, is not merely a backdrop for Ubar's story. It is an active participant, a silent witness that preserves history while challenging comprehension. Every dune, depression, and ridge may conceal remnants of human activity, but the sheer scale and impermanence of the landscape makes certainty elusive. The city's mysteries are embedded not only in physical traces, but in the interplay of legend, archaeology, and the desert itself. One of the enduring enigmas is the precise nature of Ubar's physical form. Legends describe a city of pillars, magnificence, and opulence, yet archaeological evidence presents fragments. Foundations, wells, pottery shards, and faint alignments in the sand. These remnants suggest a settlement of significant complexity, but they leave unanswered questions. Were the pillars literal, or symbolic embellishments that grew in memory and oral tradition? How large was the city, and how many people did it support? Did it function primarily as a trading hub, a spiritual center, or a combination of both? Each fragment hints at answers yet invites more questions, deepening the mystery rather than resolving it. Another layer of intrigue comes from the desert itself. Wind and sand both preserve and erase, concealing structures while revealing anomalies. Satellite imagery has revealed linear depressions that suggest ancient roads or caravan tracks. Yet on the ground, these features can be subtle, ambiguous, and subject to misinterpretation. One day, a buried wall might appear after a storm. The next, shifting dunes can erase any trace of human activity. This dynamic environment ensures that every discovery is provisional, every interpretation subject to revision, and every conclusion tempered by the desert's impermanence. Environmental mysteries also complicate understanding. Scholars continue to debate whether Ubar was destroyed by catastrophic natural events, such as earthquakes or sinkholes, or gradually abandoned due to shifting trade routes, climate change, or resource depletion. Geological surveys suggest the region has undergone significant transformation over millennia, but the precise forces that led to the city's disappearance remain uncertain. The desert provides clues in subtle forms, sediment layers, depressions, and erosion patterns, but these too can be interpreted in multiple ways, leaving scholars to balance evidence, inference, and imagination. The human dimension adds yet another layer of mystery. Who exactly inhabited Ubar? What were their lives like? How did they navigate the challenges of desert survival, trade, and governance? Pottery shards, tool remnants, and foundations offer hints, but they cannot fully convey the daily experiences, ambitions, or emotions of the people who once walked these sands. Oral histories, particularly those preserved by the Bedouins, fill some gaps, providing narrative threads that link past to present. Yet these stories are also filtered through centuries of memory, embellishment, and cultural transmission, leaving uncertainty about where history ends and legend begins. The alignment of trade routes adds further complexity. Frankincense caravans, guided by the desert's rhythms and Bedouin knowledge, left subtle traces across hundreds of kilometers. Satellite imagery reveals these faint lines, yet questions persist. Did these routes all converge on a singular hub, or were multiple settlements involved? How centralized was Ubar, and how much of the legend represents a composite of several cities and trade nodes? The desert preserves these patterns but does not provide definitive answers, demanding careful interpretation and humility from researchers. Another aspect of the mystery involves spiritual and cultural dimensions. References in scripture and pre-Islamic poetry suggest that Ubar, or Iram of the Pillars, held not only economic but also spiritual significance. The pillars may symbolize more than architecture. They could represent power, faith, or moral lessons encoded in memory and story. This intertwining of material and symbolic elements complicates the search. Even if foundations are uncovered, understanding their meaning requires bridging archaeology with history, anthropology, and mythology. The desert, silent as ever, holds the key to interpretation, but it does so obliquely, leaving clues that are fragmentary and poetic. Human attempts to uncover Ubar's secrets are also fraught with emotion and psychology. Explorers confront isolation, exhaustion, and the unpredictability of the desert, which can amplify both wonder and frustration. Every discovery, whether a shard of pottery, a line in the sand, or a partially exposed foundation, sparks elation, yet each unanswered question invites doubt. The desert's mysteries are as much about endurance and perception as they are about physical evidence. Those who pursue Ubar must navigate both the landscape and their own expectations, balancing hope, skepticism, and imagination. The interplay between myth and evidence continues to deepen the enigma. Legends speak of divine punishment, cities swallowed by sand, and the consequences of hubris, while archaeology suggests economic networks, settlements, and infrastructure. Reconciling these perspectives is both challenging and compelling. The desert does not provide a definitive narrative. Instead, it offers fragments, hints, and resonances that scholars, explorers, and storytellers must interpret. This ambiguity ensures that Ubar remains a living mystery, a puzzle that continues to invite exploration and speculation. Technological advances, from satellite imagery to ground-penetrating radar, have illuminated parts of the mystery, yet they cannot fully replace human intuition and interpretation. The desert remains an active participant, revealing patterns that must be contextualized with knowledge of history, culture, and environment. Each tool provides clarity, but also raises new questions. A line may suggest a road, but whose road was it? A wall may indicate a structure, but for what purpose? The mysteries in the sand are layered, multidimensional, and resilient, demanding both patience and insight from anyone who seeks to understand them. Ultimately, the mysteries in the sand define the allure of Ubar. They remind us that history is rarely linear, that civilizations rise and fall in complex interplay with environment, trade, and human ambition. Ubar is a mirror of human curiosity, reflecting the desire to uncover what is hidden while acknowledging that some truths are only partially accessible. The city is both tangible and elusive, a symbol of the desert's endurance and humanity's persistent quest to reconcile legend with evidence. In every excavation, every satellite image, and every Bedouin story, the desert presents new enigmas. Some fragments point to trade, governance, or daily life. Others hint at catastrophic events, moral lessons, or symbolic meanings. None provide a complete picture, yet together they form a mosaic that captures imagination, intellect, and emotion. Ubar's mysteries are inseparable from the desert itself. Its voice subtle, demanding, and eternal. To walk these sands is to engage with history in its most challenging, compelling, and poetic form, to confront absence as vividly as presence, and to recognize that some secrets endure beyond the reach of certainty. The story of Ubar exists at a crossroads where myth and material evidence collide, where oral histories and scripture intersect with archaeology and satellite imagery. For centuries, the city was known only through whispered legends. A magnificent hub, Iram of the Pillars, swallowed by divine wrath, leaving only sand as testament to its grandeur. These tales were vivid, cautionary, and poetic, inspiring awe, fear, and curiosity. Yet for modern explorers and scholars, the question remained, how much of this narrative was true, and how much was the product of imagination, embellishment, or moral storytelling? Legends describe Ubar as a city of imposing pillars, wealth beyond measure, and sophisticated civilization, instantly conjuring images of towering structures amidst a relentless desert. These stories, passed down through generations, were preserved with remarkable consistency by the Bedouins and echoed in pre-Islamic poetry and scripture. The Quran's references to Iram of the Pillars, often interpreted as both literal and metaphorical, provided a spiritual dimension to the narrative, suggesting divine retribution for hubris and corruption. To believers, Ubar represented moral lessons and historical truth intertwined, a cautionary tale embedded in the landscape of memory and faith. Archaeological evidence, however, presents a more nuanced picture. Excavations reveal foundations, pottery fragments, and traces of water management. Yet no towering pillars have been conclusively identified. Satellite imagery shows linear patterns and caravan routes converging in areas of the empty quarter, hinting at human activity, trade, and settlement. These findings suggest a city, or series of settlements, that supported trade networks, particularly in frankincense, but they do not fully match the legendary scale or imagery of the lost city. The challenge for scholars and explorers is reconciling these fragmentary realities with the richness of the myths. This tension between legend and evidence is not a flaw. It is an essential part of Ubar's story. Myths often amplify reality, preserving truths in symbolic form, and the city may have been a hub whose influence and significance were magnified through oral transmission. Pillars may not have been literal, monumental columns, but could symbolize wealth, power, or cultural achievement. The blending of fact and metaphor in legend complicates attempts at verification, yet it also preserves meaning that pure material evidence might fail to convey. In this sense, the myths themselves are a form of historical testimony, encoded with moral, cultural, and social dimensions. The interplay of legends and evidence also reveals the limitations of human perception. Explorers approaching Ubar with expectations shaped by stories often projected grandeur onto fragments, interpreting modest foundations as proof of magnificence. Conversely, skeptics may dismiss consistent oral histories, undervaluing the knowledge encoded in centuries of tradition. Both extremes demonstrate the delicate balance required when engaging with a site like Ubar, where imagination and observation must coexist, guiding inquiry without distorting it. The Bedouins' oral histories are central to this dynamic. Their accounts, while poetic and moralistic, preserve details about routes, wells, and settlements, which modern archaeology has often confirmed. These narratives do not merely entertain. They encode empirical knowledge about the desert, resources, and human activity. The convergence of these oral traditions with satellite data and excavation results strengthens the argument that Ubar was more than myth, yet it also illustrates the difficulty of separating symbolic content from literal fact. Legends and evidence exist in dialogue, each informing and challenging the other. This dialogue is further complicated by temporal distance. The city, if it existed, vanished centuries ago, and environmental changes have dramatically reshaped the landscape. Sand has erased streets, buried structures, and obliterated material evidence, while legend persisted relatively unchanged. In this sense, mythology has preserved continuity where physical traces have been lost. Scholars and explorers are thus confronted with the dual task of interpreting what remains in the sand and decoding the symbolic truths preserved in stories, poetry, and scripture. The tension between legend and evidence also has profound emotional resonance. Legends evoke wonder, fear, and imagination. Evidence evokes awe, intellectual satisfaction, and a tangible connection to history. Ubar becomes a story of human aspiration, ambition, and vulnerability, reflected both in the physical traces of civilization and in the tales that have survived time and desert alike. The contrast underscores the fragility of human achievement and the resilience of memory. The city may vanish, yet its story endures, inscribed in sand, song, and scripture. Moreover, the interaction of myth and evidence exemplifies the broader challenge of historical reconstruction. Human history is rarely preserved in perfect clarity. Memory, tradition, and imagination often shape the way events are remembered and transmitted. Ubar serves as a case study in how legend can guide discovery, provide context, and enrich interpretation, even as it complicates empirical verification. It reminds scholars that history is not merely what is visible, but also what is remembered, imagined, and interpreted. Ultimately, the story of Ubar demonstrates that legends and evidence are not necessarily opposing forces. Instead, they are complementary ways of knowing, each illuminating different facets of the past. Legends preserve the moral, cultural, and symbolic dimensions. Evidence reveals the material, economic, and logistical realities. Together, they form a richer, more complex understanding of human endeavor, ambition, and interaction with environment. In this synthesis, Ubar transcends its physical form, becoming both a site of archaeological inquiry and a narrative that continues to captivate the imagination. The city, whether measured by fragments or imagined in stories, embodies the human desire to comprehend, to explore, and to connect across time. Every excavation, every satellite image, and every retold tale contributes to a tapestry that intertwines myth with reality. Ubar's story exists in the tension between what was and what is remembered, challenging us to embrace ambiguity, celebrate discovery, and respect the enduring power of narrative. Legends and evidence coexist, shaping a history that is not only seen in the sands, but felt in the imagination and memory of those who seek to understand it. The desert that once cradled Ubar is a place of extremes. Endless sand dunes stretch beyond the horizon, shifting with every wind, concealing secrets beneath their restless surface. For centuries, the harsh environment dictated the rhythm of life, shaping the decisions, ambitions, and survival strategies of those who lived there. One of the most compelling questions about Ubar centers on its disappearance. Did the city vanish suddenly, a victim of catastrophe, or slowly succumb to environmental pressures that made life unsustainable? The answer may lie in the very landscape itself, a record written in sand, stone, and sediment. Environmental factors in the Arabian Peninsula are both subtle and powerful. Shifts in rainfall, the drying of aquifers, and the gradual encroachment of the desert could have transformed once fertile oases into barren stretches of sand. Archaeological surveys suggest that wells, irrigation channels, and settlement foundations were carefully planned, reflecting an intimate understanding of scarce water resources. Yet even the most sophisticated water management systems have limits, and gradual climatic deterioration could have placed immense stress on Ubar's inhabitants. The city may have faced dwindling resources, making survival increasingly precarious and trade routes more difficult to maintain. Geological evidence adds another dimension to the debate. The Rub al-Khali, or empty quarter, where Ubar is believed to have existed, is geologically dynamic. Shifting sands, wind erosion, and the occasional collapse of subterranean caverns have the potential to obliterate structures over time. Studies of the desert floor indicate that sinkholes and subsurface cavities may have contributed to the disappearance of settlements. While legend attributes Ubar's demise to divine punishment, scientific analysis suggests that natural geological processes could account for at least part of its erasure. The desert does not always destroy suddenly. Often, it acts incrementally, leaving only traces of civilizations that once thrived. Trade networks themselves were vulnerable to environmental change. Ubar's prosperity was linked to the movement of frankincense and other commodities, but these routes were dependent on reliable water sources and navigable terrain. As climate shifted, caravan paths may have become longer, more treacherous, or economically unsustainable. Gradually, trade may have bypassed Ubar, weakening its role as a hub and undermining the city's economic foundation. In this scenario, environmental pressures were not just physical. They reshaped the social and economic networks that sustained human life in the desert. Environmental collapse is not purely hypothetical. Excavations and soil analysis suggest periods of drought, and shifts in groundwater levels during the era Ubar is believed to have flourished. These changes would have directly impacted agriculture, livestock, and access to potable water. A city whose survival depended on careful balance between human ingenuity and natural resources could have been particularly vulnerable. The desert's harshness, combined with the fragility of these systems, may have led to a slow abandonment, leaving behind fragments of structures, wells, and trade routes that we now uncover. Yet, environmental collapse does not preclude human agency or societal complexity. Ubar's inhabitants were skilled, adaptive, and resourceful, yet even the most capable societies are subject to limits imposed by nature. The desert imposes constraints on settlement size, architectural durability, and the sustainability of trade networks. Even as legends describe sudden destruction, winds, divine retribution, or catastrophic collapse, the archaeological record suggests that environmental stress played a critical role in shaping the city's fate. The interplay between human endeavor and environmental forces is at the heart of the mystery. There is also a symbolic dimension to the idea of environmental collapse. Legends of Ubar's destruction may reflect collective memory of ecological stress, encoded in stories of moral or spiritual consequence. Tales of pillars crumbling or cities swallowed by sand may be poetic expressions of real events. Prolonged drought, the drying of wells, or the abandonment of settlements. In this way, mythology and environmental evidence intersect, offering complementary perspectives on the city's disappearance. The desert, ever vigilant, transforms physical scarcity into narrative lesson. Modern technology has allowed researchers to examine these possibilities in detail. Satellite imagery, sediment analysis, and hydrological surveys provide data on historical water availability, soil composition, and terrain stability. When combined with archaeological findings, these insights offer a nuanced picture. Ubar may have declined gradually due to environmental pressures, even as legend dramatized its end. The city's demise, therefore, may have been neither instantaneous nor entirely catastrophic, but a complex interplay of ecological, economic, and social factors. The emotional resonance of environmental collapse is striking. Walking amid ruins, imagining the gradual retreat of water and the desert's slow encroachment, one can sense the fragility of human endeavor. Ubar becomes a reflection not only of ambition but also of vulnerability, a reminder that even advanced planning and ingenuity are subject to forces far beyond human control. The desert, indifferent yet preserving, holds the story of endurance and erasure, demonstrating that survival is always contingent and impermanence inevitable. Environmental collapse also reframes our understanding of history. It highlights the dynamic relationship between humans and their environment, emphasizing adaptation, resilience, and eventual limitation. Ubar's disappearance, whether sudden or gradual, underscores the delicate balance that civilizations must maintain with natural forces. It reminds us that progress and prosperity are provisional, and that nature, in its quiet and relentless way, can erase the most ambitious human constructions over time. Ultimately, environmental collapse may explain why Ubar exists today more as legend than as an intact city. The desert's power, combined with shifts in climate, trade, and human settlement patterns, created conditions that led to the city's abandonment and partial erasure. Yet even in its absence, Ubar continues to resonate, preserved in sand, stories, and the imagination. Its legacy is a cautionary tale about resilience, adaptation, and the limits of human ambition, reminding us that history is shaped as much by nature as by human hands. Walking through the empty quarter today, one senses both absence and presence. Traces of walls, pottery shards, and trade paths hint at the lives once sustained here, while the vast, shifting sands speak to forces beyond comprehension. Environmental collapse is not merely a theory. It is felt in the rhythm of the desert, the scarcity of water, and the fragility of settlements that have succumbed to its demands. In Ubar, we witness the profound impact of environment on civilization, a story of ingenuity, endurance, and inevitable vulnerability, a mystery written not only in stone but in sand and memory alike. Amid the dunes, the story of Ubar is not only one of architecture, trade, or environmental challenge. It is the story of people. The human cost of the city's rise and fall echoes across centuries, whispering through foundations, pottery fragments, and oral histories. Ubar was not merely a site of commerce or legend. It was a place where men, women, and children lived, labored, and dreamed, navigating the harsh desert with courage, ingenuity, and endurance. Understanding this human dimension is essential to grasp the full scope of the city's legacy. Life in the desert was unforgiving. Daily survival demanded careful planning, intimate knowledge of the terrain, and constant vigilance against the elements. Water was precious, wells were strategic, and trade routes dictated not just commerce but existence. People who inhabited Ubar needed to understand the delicate balance between resource management and human ambition. Every decision, where to dig a well, which route to take with a caravan, how to allocate labor, carried the weight of life and death. The human cost of miscalculation could be catastrophic, and yet these communities thrived for generations, adapting to the desert's rhythms with remarkable skill. Trade, particularly in frankincense, brought both prosperity and risk. Caravans traversed hundreds of kilometers, facing extreme heat, sandstorms, and potential conflict. Merchants, guards, and laborers were exposed to danger daily. Yet the rewards of trade were immense, shaping the city's wealth, power, and influence. Archaeological evidence of storage facilities, trade infrastructure, and caravan waypoints hints at a society organized to sustain such commerce. The human cost, however, was embedded in these very systems. Relentless labor, exposure to danger, and dependence on resources that could be fleeting or unpredictable. The psychological and emotional toll must also be considered. The desert, while a source of sustenance and strategic advantage, was also isolating and harsh. Generations of inhabitants would have known long, silent stretches of sand, extreme heat, and uncertainty about the future. Decisions regarding settlement, trade, or migration were not abstract. They were matters of life and survival. The collapse or abandonment of the city would have carried profound emotional consequences. Loss of home, livelihood, and identity. Stories of Ubar as a city swallowed by sand may encode these human experiences, preserving memory through legend and cautionary tale. Violence, both human and environmental, contributed to the human cost. Conflict over trade routes, competition for resources, and societal hierarchies could have created tension and risk within the community. Simultaneously, the desert itself was a formidable adversary. Drought, heat, and shifting sands were constant threats. Archaeology reveals a society that managed to endure for centuries, but the fragility of life in such a harsh environment would have made every triumph temporary, every moment of prosperity precarious. The human experience in Ubar was inseparable from the environment, a continuous negotiation between resilience and vulnerability. The labor required to sustain the city was immense. Building foundations, digging wells, transporting goods, and maintaining structures demanded skill, coordination, and effort. Women, men, and children contributed to the functioning of society in ways that archaeology can only partially illuminate. Pottery shards, tools, and remnants of dwellings hint at domestic life and labor practices, revealing a community whose survival depended on cooperation, endurance, and ingenuity. Each artifact is a testament to human effort and the labor embedded in the city's very existence. Even the city's eventual abandonment reflects the human cost of environmental, economic, and social pressures. As resources dwindled, trade shifted, or geological events disrupted habitation, the inhabitants faced difficult choices: adapt, migrate, or risk survival in a deteriorating environment. This slow dissolution would have carried profound consequences. Families uprooted, social networks fractured, and knowledge lost. The physical remnants, walls, wells, and roads, are silent witnesses to this human struggle, capturing the tension between ambition and limitation, hope and survival. Legend and scripture amplify this human dimension. Stories of divine retribution or catastrophe may symbolize the consequences of mismanagement, hubris, or societal excess. Yet beneath these moral narratives lie traces of lived experience. People navigating risk, negotiating scarcity, and striving for continuity. The city's collapse, whether sudden or gradual, is thus inseparable from the experiences, decisions, and vulnerabilities of its inhabitants. Archaeology may reveal walls, trade routes, and tools, but it is the human context, the sweat, hope, fear, and resilience, that imbues these fragments with meaning. Modern fascination with Ubar often focuses on mystery and grandeur, yet the human cost is equally compelling. It reminds us that behind every legend, every shard of pottery, and every line in the sand, there were people who faced consequences, made choices, and lived with uncertainty. Understanding their experiences allows us to see Ubar not merely as a lost city, but as a community shaped by ambition, resilience, and the realities of desert life. The ruins are not inert. They are echoes of human endeavor, endurance, and vulnerability. Ultimately, the human cost of Ubar is a story of resilience amid fragility. The city's inhabitants built, traded, and endured in one of the harshest environments on Earth, leaving behind traces that inspire curiosity, empathy, and awe. Their labor, struggles, and experiences continue to speak across millennia, connecting us to a civilization both extraordinary and ephemeral. In Ubar, human ambition meets environmental challenge, and in the fragments that survive, we glimpse not only what was built, but the cost of sustaining life, community, and legacy in a desert that demands both courage and humility. Walking the empty quarter today, it is possible to imagine the human presence that once animated the city. The merchants navigating trade routes, families tending wells, laborers constructing foundations, and leaders planning for survival. These ghosts of labor, hope, and endurance are as much a part of Ubar's story as the sand, stone, or legend. In contemplating the human cost, we see the city not only as a site of mystery or archaeological interest, but as a vivid testament to human resilience and vulnerability, a story written as much in lives as in ruins. The story of Ubar has inspired not only archaeologists but dreamers, theorists, and storytellers, all seeking to explain the city's disappearance, its grandeur, and its enduring legend. From the moment whispers of its existence reached the modern world, countless theories have emerged, each attempting to reconcile fragments of evidence, satellite imagery, and oral tradition into a coherent narrative. Some are grounded in hard science. Others verge on speculation, blending imagination with observation. Together, they create a rich tapestry of interpretation, each theory revealing as much about human curiosity as about the city itself. One prevailing theory is that Ubar was a center of commerce, strategically positioned at the crossroads of ancient trade routes, particularly for frankincense and myrrh. The linear depressions observed in satellite imagery, interpreted as caravan trails, support this idea. These routes converged toward a point in the desert, suggesting a hub of logistical coordination and economic activity. In this scenario, Ubar's prosperity depended on both human ingenuity and geographic advantage, and its eventual decline may have been tied to shifts in trade patterns, environmental stress, or the depletion of critical resources. The theory emphasizes practical factors, providing a grounded explanation for both the city's prominence and its disappearance. Another theory emphasizes geological catastrophe. Some researchers propose that underground caverns or sinkholes beneath the desert may have collapsed, swallowing portions of the city and altering the landscape irrevocably. Such an event could account for the sudden disappearance described in legends, aligning partially with narratives of divine punishment or dramatic destruction. Geological surveys lend some credence to this idea, revealing subsurface instability in regions associated with Ubar. This theory, while speculative, underscores the desert's dynamic nature and the ever-present tension between human ambition and environmental forces. A more mystical theory considers Ubar through the lens of legend and scripture. In this interpretation, the city's destruction represents a moral or spiritual allegory, illustrating the consequences of hubris, corruption, or divine displeasure. Iram of the Pillars, as described in the Quran, is not merely a city but a symbol of human ambition unchecked by morality. From this perspective, archaeological evidence is secondary. The primary lesson is symbolic, encoded in myth and story. Yet intriguingly, Material traces of settlements in the desert suggest that legend may have been inspired by real locations, blending the moral and empirical into a single narrative. Some speculators have proposed that Ubar was not a singular city but a network of interconnected settlements or trade nodes. The convergence of caravan routes may not indicate one central hub, but rather multiple smaller settlements that collectively functioned as a commercial and cultural center. Over time, oral tradition and legend could have merged these nodes into a single lost city of mythic proportions. This theory offers a compelling explanation for the disparity between archaeological evidence and the grandeur described in texts and tales, reconciling fragmentary material with enduring stories. Technological advancements have also fueled speculation. The use of satellite imagery and multispectral analysis has revealed patterns previously invisible, leading some to propose that Ubar was larger, more organized, and more sophisticated than initially believed. Yet every discovery raises new questions. Were these foundations part of a city, a series of trade posts, or the remnants of ritual structures? Each line in the sand may carry multiple meanings, and the act of interpretation itself becomes part of the story. The desert preserves ambiguity, forcing theorists to grapple with uncertainty while striving to construct plausible scenarios. Environmental theories dominate much modern speculation. Changes in climate, water scarcity, and desertification likely played a role in Ubar's decline. Some researchers suggest that even minor shifts in rainfall patterns or groundwater availability could have undermined agriculture, trade, and settlement sustainability. These environmental pressures, combined with economic and social factors, may have led to gradual abandonment rather than sudden catastrophe. Such a perspective situates Ubar within broader historical patterns, emphasizing the delicate balance between human ambition and ecological constraint. More imaginative speculations, often bordering on the fantastical, have also emerged. Some theorists suggest that Ubar may have possessed knowledge or technologies lost to history, advanced water management, construction techniques, or cultural sophistication, making it appear miraculous or legendary to later generations. Others propose that Ubar's disappearance was deliberately exaggerated, mythologized, or obscured to convey moral lessons. While these theories are less grounded in evidence, they reflect humanity's enduring fascination with lost knowledge, mystery, and the possibility that history may hide secrets still waiting to be uncovered. The diversity of theories highlights a fundamental truth. Ubar captivates because it resists simple explanation. Every new piece of evidence, whether a shard of pottery, a faint foundation, or a satellite-detected route, offers partial clarity but opens further questions. This interplay between discovery and mystery is central to the city's enduring allure. Scholars, explorers, and enthusiasts are not merely searching for a location. They are attempting to reconstruct a civilization, understand its collapse, and interpret the meaning encoded in both legend and archaeology. The human element adds depth to speculation. Explorers drawn by the idea of Ubar as a lost city are motivated not just by curiosity, but by a desire to connect with the lives, ambitions, and struggles of people who lived centuries ago. Theories about the city are thus intertwined with human empathy and imagination, as well as empirical analysis. Each scenario, whether catastrophic collapse, gradual environmental decline, or legendary moral allegory, illuminates different aspects of human civilization and the challenges of survival in one of the harshest landscapes on Earth. Ultimately, the theories surrounding Ubar are more than academic exercises. They are expressions of our need to understand, interpret, and connect with the past. The city embodies the tension between myth and reality, human ingenuity and natural forces, survival and impermanence. In contemplating the possibilities, we engage with history not as passive observers, but as participants in a narrative that spans centuries, deserts, and imagination. Ubar, through its mysteries, invites speculation precisely because it remains elusive, a puzzle whose pieces exist in sand, memory, legend, and evidence alike. The multiplicity of interpretations also reflects the richness of human curiosity. Scholars, adventurers, and storytellers alike are compelled to reconcile fact with narrative, exploring the city from diverse angles. Economic, geological, cultural, spiritual, and technological. Each theory contributes to a layered understanding, demonstrating that the mystery of Ubar is not simply about locating a city, but about appreciating the complex dynamics of human history, the resilience of civilizations, and the enduring power of story. In the end, speculation and theory are inseparable from the search itself. Ubar cannot be understood solely through ruins or satellite imagery. It requires imagination, interpretation, and willingness to dwell in ambiguity. Every theory illuminates a facet of the past while acknowledging the limits of certainty. The city, both lost and remembered, becomes a lens through which we examine human ambition, resilience, and the eternal interplay between evidence and imagination. In the desert, every possibility is real until proven otherwise, and every hypothesis carries the weight of centuries, echoing with both presence and absence. The sands of the empty quarter stretch endlessly, yet within their shifting patterns lies the echo of human ambition, resilience, and impermanence. Ubar, whether myth, city, or network of settlements, reminds us that civilizations rise and fall, shaped as much by environment and chance as by human ingenuity. The fragments we uncover, foundations, trade routes, and stories, connect us to lives long vanished, blending legend with evidence. In contemplating Ubar, we confront not only history but the fragile beauty of human endeavor, the enduring power of memory, and the mysteries that continue to whisper through the desert winds. The desert winds continue to whisper across the empty quarter, carrying fragments of stories, memories, and echoes of Ubar. Though the city itself may have vanished beneath layers of sand, its influence persists in the imagination of those who seek it. Every shard, every faint roadway, every oral tale reminds us of human ambition, resilience, and the fragile beauty of civilization. In the interplay of myth and evidence, the city becomes timeless, existing simultaneously as history and legend. Ubar teaches that even in disappearance, something enduring remains, a story that transcends ruins and continues to inspire wonder, reflection, and the search for understanding.